Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Sheriff Marcus Brennan had seen enough death in his 23 years wearing the badge to know when something wasn't right. The call came in at 4:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October, the kind of pre-dawn darkness that made even seasoned law enforcement officers feel uneasy. Martha Henley's voice on the dispatch radio was strained, barely controlled. "Sheriff, we got a body down by Copper Creek. Hunting accident, they're saying, but..." Her voice trailed off, leaving that word hanging in the static-filled silence. But, in Holloway County, that word carried weight. Nothing was ever simple in this stretch of rural Kentucky, where the nearest backup was 45 minutes away on a good day, and cell towers were as scarce as honest politicians. Brennan had learned to trust Martha's instincts over the years. She'd been dispatching for the county since before he was born, and if something felt wrong to her, it usually was. The drive to Copper Creek took him through winding back roads that most GPS systems couldn't find, past trailer homes with Confederate flags hanging limp in the still morning air, and abandoned tobacco barns slowly surrendering to kudzu. This was the kind of country where people minded their own business, sometimes to a fault, where a man could disappear for weeks before anyone thought to check on him, and where the line between accident and intentional harm could blur like morning fog over the hollers. Brennan pulled up to the scene just as the sun was beginning to paint the eastern sky a pale orange. 3 vehicles were already there. Dr. Evelyn Shaw's beat-up Honda Civic, which served as Holloway County's mobile coroner unit, Deputy Tommy Reeves' patrol car, and a mud-splattered Ford F-150 that belonged to the man who'd found the body. That would be Curtis Malloy, a local hunting guide whose family had been working these woods for 4 generations. Curtis was sitting on his truck's tailgate, smoking a cigarette with hands that shook just enough to notice. His face was the color of old newspaper, and when he looked up at Brennan, his eyes held the particular hollow look of a man who'd seen something that would follow him home. "Morning, Curtis," Brennan said, keeping his voice level. Hell of a thing to stumble across. Curtis took a long drag of his cigarette before answering. "Sheriff, I've been hunting these woods since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. Seen plenty of hunting accidents over the years. This ain't one of them." Dr. Shaw emerged from the tree line, pulling off latex gloves with practiced efficiency. At 68, she'd been serving as Holloway County's coroner for longer than anyone cared to remember, combining her medical degree with the kind of rural pragmatism that came from delivering babies and pronouncing deaths in equal measure. Her gray hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and her wire-rimmed glasses had seen better days, but her eyes were sharp as a scalpel. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying the weight of bad news, "you need to see this." The body was 20 yards into the woods, in a small clearing that hunters used as a staging area. It was positioned against the base of a massive oak tree, arranged in what most people would call a sitting position. The victim was male, probably in his 40s, wearing full camouflage hunting gear that looked expensive. Too expensive for most folks in Holloway County. But it wasn't the hunting gear that made Brennan's stomach tighten. It was the way the man had been killed. 3 shots, Dr. Shaw said, crouching beside the body. 1 to the chest, 1 to the abdomen, and 1 to the head. The headshot came last, based on the blood spatter patterns. Someone wanted to make sure this man was dead. Brennan studied the scene, his trained eye picking up details that would matter later. The victim's rifle was leaning against a tree 15 feet away, unfired. His hunting pack was neatly placed beside him, contents undisturbed. No signs of struggle, no defensive wounds visible. Whoever had done this had caught their victim completely off guard. "Any ID?" Brennan asked. Deputy Reeves, an earnest young man who'd joined the department straight out of the community college's criminal justice program, stepped forward with an evidence bag. Driver's license says David Harrison, age 42, address in Louisville. Looks like he was staying at the Whispering Pines Lodge. Brennan knew the place. It was one of those upscale hunting lodges that catered to city folks who wanted to play Daniel Boone for a weekend. The kind of operation that charged more for 3 days than most locals made in a month. It was owned by the Carver family, who'd been buying up property in Holloway County for the past 5 years, turning working farms into hunting preserves for wealthy clients. "Curtis, you know anything about this fellow?" Brennan asked. Curtis flicked his cigarette butt into the dirt and ground it out with his boot heel. "Never seen him before, but I heard tell there was some city hunter bragging at Mac's Tavern last night about the 10-point buck he was going to bag this morning. Said he had a guaranteed spot that was going to make him famous among his hunting buddies back home." "Guaranteed spot?" Dr. Shaw raised an eyebrow. "That's not how hunting works." "No, ma'am, it ain't," Curtis agreed. "But that's what's got folks around here all stirred up. These city hunters coming in with their fancy equipment and their guaranteed kills. Some of the local boys ain't too happy about it." Brennan felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. In a county where unemployment ran high, and most folks struggled to put food on the table, resentment toward wealthy outsiders could simmer just beneath the surface, waiting for the right spark to ignite. He'd seen it before in other rural communities. Economic pressure, cultural differences, and easy access to firearms created a volatile combination. "Tommy, I want you to head over to the lodge and see what you can find out about Harrison's activities yesterday. Who he talked to, where he went, what time he left this morning." Brennan turned to Curtis. "I need you to stick around for a while longer. Walk me through exactly how you found him." Curtis lit another cigarette, his hands steadier now that he had something to focus on. "I was heading to my tree stand, same one I've used for the past 10 seasons. It's about a quarter-mile north of here, up on the ridge. I always come through this clearing on account of there's a game trail that runs right through it." He pointed to a barely visible path through the underbrush. "Soon as I stepped into the clearing, I knew something was wrong. Deer won't come near a place where there's been violence. They can smell it, you know. Fear, blood, death. The whole area was too quiet, if that makes sense." It did make sense to Brennan. He'd grown up hunting these same woods, and he knew how the forest should sound in the early morning. Birds calling, small animals rustling through the leaves, the distant sound of acorns dropping. Silence in the woods usually meant something had disturbed the natural order. "I almost turned around and went another way," Curtis continued. "But then I saw him sitting there against that tree, and for a second I thought maybe he was just taking a rest. Wasn't until I got closer that I realized." He trailed off, taking a shaky drag from his cigarette. "What time was this?" Brennan asked. 5:15, maybe 20 past. Sky was just starting to lighten up. I didn't touch nothing, just backed away and called it in on my radio." Dr. Shaw had been quietly working while they talked, taking photographs and making notes in her worn leather journal. She looked up at Brennan with the expression of someone who'd found something important. "Marcus, come look at this." She was kneeling beside the victim's left hand, which had been resting on his thigh. With a pair of tweezers, she lifted something small and white from between his fingers. "It's a note," she said, folded up tight and placed deliberately. Brennan pulled on latex gloves and carefully unfolded the paper. It was a piece of standard notebook paper, the kind any kid might tear from a spiral-bound tablet. Written in block letters with what looked like a pencil were 4 words: "Your turn is coming." The 3 of them stared at the note in silence. Finally, Curtis spoke up. "Sheriff, I think y'all got yourselves a problem." Brennan couldn't argue with that assessment. A single murder was bad enough, but a murder with a threatening note suggested something more sinister. Someone with a plan. Someone who wasn't finished. "Doc, how long has he been dead?" Dr. Shaw checked her watch and did some quick calculations. "Based on body temperature and rigor mortis, I'd estimate death occurred between midnight and 2 a.m. The killer had plenty of time to arrange the scene and get away. That meant the murder had happened during the darkest part of the night, in woods that most people wouldn't dare navigate without a flashlight. Whoever had done this knew these trails well enough to move around in complete darkness. That narrowed the suspect pool considerably. Brennan's radio crackled to life. It was Martha's voice, tense with urgency. "Sheriff, we got another situation. Jerry Atwood just called in. Says his hunting cabin was broken into last night and there's a message spray-painted on his door." "What kind of message?" Brennan asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. "Same thing you'd expect from someone making threats. You're next in red paint." Jerry Atwood owned one of the larger hunting operations in the county, a business that had been in his family for 3 generations. Like many local operators, he'd been struggling to compete with the upscale lodges that were popping up all over the region. The wealthy clients who used to book with local guides were increasingly drawn to the luxury accommodations and guaranteed success packages offered by places like Whispering Pines. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Brennan told Martha. He turned to Dr. Shaw. "Doc, I need you to process this scene as thoroughly as possible. Every piece of evidence, every photograph, every detail. If this is what I think it is, we're going to need everything we can get." "What do you think it is?" Curtis asked. Brennan looked back at the body arranged against the oak tree, thinking about the carefully placed note and the message at Jerry Atwood's cabin. "I think someone's declared war on the hunting industry in Holloway County, and I think David Harrison was just the opening shot." The drive to Jerry Atwood's place took Brennan through some of the most beautiful country in Kentucky, rolling hills covered with hardwood forest that was just beginning to show its fall colors. Under normal circumstances, it was the kind of scenery that reminded him why he'd never wanted to live anywhere else. Today, it felt like a landscape where predators could hide behind every tree. Jerry's hunting cabin sat on 40 acres of prime deer habitat, surrounded by oak and hickory trees that dropped enough acorns to keep the local deer population fat and happy. It was a modest operation compared to some of the newer lodges, but Jerry had built a solid reputation based on his knowledge of the local wildlife and his willingness to work hard for his clients. Jerry was waiting on his front porch when Brennan pulled up, a coffee mug in one hand and a .36 rifle in the other. At 55, he was still built like the high school football player he'd once been, all shoulders and stubborn determination. His face was grim, and when he stood up to greet Brennan, his movements had the careful tension of a man expecting trouble. "Morning, Sheriff," Jerry said. "Hell of a way to start the day." The message on Jerry's door was exactly what Brennan had expected. "You're next," in dripping red spray paint. But it was what was nailed to the door frame that made his blood run cold. It was a photograph. A hunting photo of the kind that clients often took to commemorate their success. It showed David Harrison kneeling beside a large buck, grinning broadly at the camera. "Where did this picture come from?" Brennan asked. "No idea," Jerry replied. "It was nailed to the door frame right below the message. Must have been taken recently because I recognize that buck. big 10-pointer that's been hanging around the creek bottom all season. Brennan studied the photograph more closely. Harrison was wearing the same hunting outfit he'd been found in, and the timestamp in the corner indicated the photo had been taken just 2 days earlier. Someone had been watching Harrison, documenting his activities, planning this murder for at least 48 hours. Jerry, I need to ask you some questions, and I need honest answers. Are you having any problems with competitors? Anyone making threats or trying to intimidate you? Jerry set his coffee mug down and leaned against the porch railing. Sheriff, I'm going to be straight with you. Things have been tough around here for the past couple years. These big lodges moving in, they're killing the small operations like mine. They got fancy cabins, gourmet meals, guides who promise clients they'll get a trophy buck guaranteed. Hard to compete with that when all you got is honest work and local knowledge. Any specific problems with other outfitters? Well, Jerry hesitated. There's been some tension with the Carver operation. Whispering Pines Lodge. They've been pretty aggressive about acquiring hunting rights on private land, making offers that local landowners can't refuse. Some folks think they're trying to monopolize the hunting business in this part of the county. Brennan made a note to pay the Carvers a visit. Anyone else? There's talk that some of the local boys aren't too happy about the situation. Billy Hackett, for instance. He used to guide for me part-time, but I haven't been able to afford to hire him this season. He's been bitter about it, drinking too much, talking about how the outsiders are ruining everything. Billy Hackett. Brennan knew the name. Billy was one of those men who'd never quite figured out how to make a living in the new economy. He'd worked various jobs over the years, logging, construction, farm labor, but nothing stuck. Guiding hunters had been one of the few things he was genuinely good at, and losing that income had hit him hard. Where can I find Billy these days? He's been staying in that old trailer behind his sister's place on Devil's Fork Road, Molly Hackett's place. But Sheriff, I ain't saying Billy did anything wrong. He's got a temper when he's drinking, but I never known him to hurt nobody. Brennan had heard similar character references before. In his experience, economic desperation could push even good people toward bad decisions. And in a county where firearms were as common as pickup trucks, a man with a grievance and too much time on his hands could become dangerous quickly. His radio crackled again. This time it was Deputy Reeves calling from Whispering Pines Lodge. Sheriff, you need to get over here. I found Harrison's room, and there's some things you need to see. Also, the lodge manager's asking a lot of questions about what happened to Harrison. Words getting around. That was inevitable in a county this small. By noon, everyone in Holloway County would know that a hunter had been murdered. By evening, the rumors would be flying like leaves in a windstorm. Brennan needed to get ahead of the story before panic set in. I'll be there in 30 minutes, he told Tommy. He turned back to Jerry. I want you to be extra careful for the next few days. Keep that rifle handy and don't go anywhere alone. If you see anything suspicious, call it in immediately. You think this maniac is really coming after me? Brennan looked at the threatening message dripping down Jerry's door and thought about the note found with Harrison's body. Jerry, I think someone is targeting people in the hunting business. Until I know who and why, I want everyone to assume they're at risk. The drive to Whispering Pines Lodge took Brennan through a part of the county that had changed dramatically in recent years. Where there had once been small farms and modest homes, there were now manicured lawns and expensive stone walls. The Carver family had invested heavily in transforming their property into something that looked more like a resort than a working ranch. The lodge itself was an impressive structure, a massive log building that managed to look both rustic and luxurious. The parking area was filled with vehicles that cost more than most local families made in a year. Range Rovers, BMW SUVs, and pickup trucks that had never seen a day of actual work. Deputy Reeves met Brennan at the front entrance, his young face tight with concern. "Sheriff, this place is buzzing like a hornet's nest. Soon as word got out about Harrison, half the guests wanted to pack up and leave. The other half are talking about organizing armed patrols." "Armed patrols?" "Yeah, they think there's some kind of anti-hunting terrorist loose in the woods. A few of them are talking about hunting the hunter, if you know what I mean." That was exactly what Brennan had been afraid of. The last thing Holloway County needed was a bunch of armed city folks playing vigilante in unfamiliar territory. "Who's in charge here?" "Robert Carver. He's the one who manages the day-to-day operations. His father owns the place, but he mostly stays back in Louisville. Robert's been trying to keep everyone calm, but you can tell he's worried about his business." They found Robert Carver in the lodge's main common room, a vast space dominated by a stone fireplace large enough to roast a whole deer. He was a man in his early 40s, dressed in the kind of outdoor clothing that cost a fortune, but had never seen real use. His appearance was carefully crafted to suggest rugged competence, but his soft hands and nervous manner suggested otherwise. "Sheriff Brennan, thank God you're here," Carver said, approaching with the quick steps of a man under pressure. "This is a disaster. Do you have any idea who killed David? Our guests are terrified." "I'm still investigating, Mr. Carver. I need to ask you some questions about Harrison's activities yesterday." "Of course. Anything I can do to help. David was one of our premium clients. Booked the presidential package. That includes a private guide, guaranteed trophy opportunity, and luxury accommodations." "Guaranteed trophy opportunity?" Carver's expression became slightly uncomfortable. "Well, it's a marketing term. We have excellent hunting grounds and experienced guides. Success rates are very high." Brennan made a mental note to explore that topic further. "Who was Harrison's guide?" "Marcus Webb. He's been with us for 2 years. Came highly recommended from an operation down in Tennessee. Very professional, knows these woods better than anyone." "I'll need to speak with him." "That might be difficult. Marcus didn't show up for work this morning. We've been trying to reach him all day, but his phone goes straight to voicemail." Brennan felt that familiar tightening in his chest that came when a case started to get complicated. "When did you last see Webb?" "Yesterday evening, around 8 o'clock. He'd just finished briefing David about this morning's hunt. Everything seemed normal. I'll need Webb's address and phone number. Also, I want to see Harrison's room." Harrison's room was on the lodge's second floor, with a view of the forest where he'd died just a few hours earlier. It was expensively appointed, with leather furniture and local artwork that probably cost more than most people's cars. But it was what Deputy Reeves had found in Harrison's belongings that interested Brennan most. "Look at this," Tommy said, pointing to an open laptop on the room's writing desk. The screen showed an email account with several recent messages. Harrison was corresponding with someone about his hunting trip, but the emails are weird. Brennan read through the messages, his concern growing with each one. The correspondence was with someone calling themselves Mountain Justice, and the tone was increasingly threatening. "Mr. Harrison, you should reconsider your planned hunting trip to Holloway County. The local wildlife deserves better than to be slaughtered by wealthy outsiders for entertainment. Your guaranteed trophy hunt is an insult to the traditions of this region. Real hunters earn their success through skill and patience, not through purchasing it. If you proceed with your hunt, you will face consequences. This is not a threat, it is a promise." The final email had been sent just 12 hours before Harrison's murder. "Your time is up. The reckoning begins at dawn. Has anyone else seen these? Brennan asked. Just me, Tommy replied. I figured you'd want to see them first. Good thinking. I want this laptop bagged as evidence, and I want every one of these emails printed out. Brennan turned to Carver, who had been reading over his shoulder. Mr. Carver, have any of your other guests received similar messages? Carver's face had gone pale. I don't know. This is the first I've heard of anything like this. Sheriff, what are we dealing with here? Before Brennan could answer, his radio erupted with Martha's voice, more urgent than he'd ever heard her. Sheriff, we got a major situation developing. Billy Hackett just walked into Mac's tavern carrying a rifle and demanding to know which of the hunters killed his brother. Says he's got a list of names and he ain't leaving until he gets justice. Brennan's blood went cold. Billy Hackett had a brother named Daniel who died in a hunting accident 3 years earlier. It had been ruled accidental, a case of mistaken identity during deer season. But the family had never fully accepted that conclusion. Martha, is Billy threatening anyone specifically? He's got a piece of paper with names on it. From what I can hear in the background, it sounds like he's reading off the names of everyone who's been hunting in the county this week. Sheriff, there's at least a dozen people in that tavern, and half of them are armed. I'm on my way. Call in every available unit and get the state police on the line. Tell them we might need backup. Brennan turned to Deputy Reeves. Tommy, I want you to stay here and keep these people calm. Don't let anyone leave the lodge and don't let anyone form any vigilante groups. If this situation gets out of hand, it could turn into a war zone. Mac's Tavern was located in the heart of Holloway County's small downtown district, a collection of weathered buildings that had seen better days. The tavern itself was the kind of place where working men came to drink beer and complain about their problems, where everyone knew everyone else's business and where tempers could flare over the smallest disagreements. Brennan could see the situation was serious before he even got out of his patrol car. There were pickup trucks and cars scattered around the tavern's parking lot in haphazard patterns, as if their owners had arrived in a hurry. Through the windows he could see the silhouettes of people standing in tense groups. He called Martha on his radio. What's the current situation? Billy's been in there for about 20 minutes. Far as I can tell, he hasn't hurt nobody yet, but he's agitated and drinking. Keep talking about his brother Daniel and how the rich hunters killed him and covered it up. Any word from the state police? They're sending a negotiator, but it'll be at least an hour before he gets here. You're on your own for now. Brennan checked his sidearm and approached the tavern's front door. Through the glass he could see Billy Hackett standing near the bar, a lever-action rifle cradled in his arms. Billy was a big man, probably 6'4" and built like a lumberjack, with the kind of beard that suggested he'd given up caring about appearances. His eyes were red-rimmed, whether from drinking or crying or both. The tavern's other patrons were pressed against the walls, trying to stay out of Billy's line of sight. Brennan recognized most of them. Local workers, a few farmers, and unfortunately, 3 men wearing expensive hunting gear who were obviously guests from one of the lodges. Brennan took a deep breath and pushed through the door. Morning, Billy. Billy turned toward him, and Brennan could see the pain and rage warring in his eyes. Sheriff, you just stay back. I ain't here for you, I'm here for justice. What kind of justice, Billy? The kind that Danny never got. Billy's voice cracked slightly. 3 years, Sheriff. 3 years since some rich asshole shot my little brother and called it an accident. 3 years of watching more and more of these hunters come into our county, treating it like their personal playground. Brennan moved slowly closer, keeping his hands visible and his voice calm. Billy, we investigated Danny's death thoroughly. It was a tragic accident, but there was no evidence of foul play. Bullshit. Billy swung the rifle toward the 3 hunters cowering against the far wall. "You think I don't know what really happened? You think I don't know about the cover-ups and the bribes and the way rich folks get different treatment?" One of the hunters, a middle-aged man wearing enough camouflage to outfit a small army, spoke up in a shaky voice. "Sir, I don't know anything about your brother. We just came here for breakfast." "Shut up," Billy shouted. "You think you can just come here and kill whatever you want? You think our woods and our animals are just here for your entertainment?" Brennan could see the situation deteriorating rapidly. Billy was drunk, grieving, and armed. The hunters were terrified and might do something stupid. The local patrons were caught in the middle, and some of them were probably armed as well. "Billy, let's talk about this outside. Just you and me. I ain't going nowhere until someone pays for what happened to Danny." "What do you want, Billy? What would make this right?" Billy's face contorted with emotion. "I want them gone, all of them. I want these rich bastards to stop coming here and treating us like we're part of the scenery. I want—" His voice broke completely, and for a moment he looked like a lost child rather than a dangerous man with a gun. That's when Brennan noticed something that changed everything. Billy was holding a piece of paper in his left hand, and even from across the room, Brennan could see that it was covered with handwriting, the same block lettering he'd seen in the note found with David Harrison's body. "Billy, where did you get that list?" Billy looked down at the paper as if he'd forgotten he was holding it. "Someone left it at my trailer last night. Said it had the names of all the hunters who were responsible for Danny's death." "Who left it?" "I don't know. Found it tacked to my door this morning, along with a note saying it was time to make things right." Brennan felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Someone was manipulating Billy, using his grief and anger to create chaos. The same someone who had murdered David Harrison and left threatening messages for Jerry Atwood. "Billy, I think someone's been lying to you. I think someone's trying to use you to hurt innocent people. You're lying." But there was uncertainty in Billy's voice now, a crack in his rage that Brennan could work with. "Let me see that list, Billy. Let me help you figure out what's really going on." Billy hesitated, looking between the list and the terrified hunters. Finally, slowly, he extended the paper toward Brennan. The list contained the names of 12 people, all hunters who had visited Holloway County in the past month. David Harrison's name was at the top, with a red line drawn through it. The other names included Jerry Atwood's clients, guests from Whispering Pines Lodge, and several independent hunters who had booked with local guides. At the bottom of the list, in the same block lettering, was a message. "These are the people who killed your brother. They all deserve to pay. Start with Harrison, the others will follow." "Billy, this list is fake. Most of these people weren't even in Kentucky when Danny died. Someone's been playing you." Billy's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, doubt, and finally, a terrible understanding. "You mean someone's been lying to me about Danny?" "I think so. And I think the same person killed David Harrison and is trying to frame you for it." Billy slowly lowered his rifle, the fight going out of him like air from a punctured tire. "Sheriff, I wouldn't have. I just wanted someone to pay for what happened to my little brother. I know, Billy, and I'm going to find out who's really responsible. But first, I need you to put down that rifle and let these people go home." Billy nodded and carefully placed the rifle on the bar. The tension in the room dropped noticeably, and the hunters began moving toward the door with the quick, nervous steps of people who'd just dodged a bullet. Brennan handcuffed Billy, more for his own protection than anything else. A mob of angry hunters could be just as dangerous as one angry local. "Billy, I'm placing you under protective custody until we sort this out. Someone's been manipulating you and they might not be finished." As he led Billy outside, Brennan's mind was racing. The real killer was still out there, and now they knew they could manipulate people into doing their dirty work. David Harrison was dead, Jerry Atwood had been threatened, and Billy Hackett had nearly become an unwitting accomplice to mass murder. But who was behind it all? Someone with detailed knowledge of the local hunting industry, someone who knew about Danny Hackett's death and how to exploit Billy's grief. Someone who could move through the woods at night without being detected, and someone with access to information about the hunter's activities. His radio crackled. It was Martha again, and her voice carried a new note of urgency. "Sheriff, we got another problem. Marcus Webb's truck was found abandoned down by Miller's Creek. There's blood on the driver's seat, and his hunting rifle is missing." Marcus Webb, the missing hunting guide from Whispering Pines Lodge. The man who had been guiding David Harrison just hours before his murder. Brennan had been planning to interview Webb as a potential witness, but now it looked like he might be another victim. Any sign of Webb himself? Negative. Just the truck and the blood. But Sheriff, there's something else. Someone spray-painted a message on the side of the truck. "The hunt continues." Brennan delivered Billy to the county jail, where he would be safe until they could sort out his role in the day's events. Billy was cooperative now, clearly shaken by the realization that he'd been manipulated. He provided Brennan with details about how he'd found the list and the note, describing a figure in dark clothing who had approached his trailer in the early morning hours. "Couldn't see much in the dark," Billy said. "Person was wearing some kind of hood or mask. They didn't say nothing, just handed me the note and walked away. By the time I got my flashlight, they were gone." "Could you tell if it was a man or woman?" "No, sir. They were about average height, maybe 5'8" or 5'9". Could have been either." Brennan left Billy in the capable hands of Sergeant Rodriguez, who had driven down from the state police barracks to provide backup. Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran who had seen his share of rural violence, and he understood the delicate balance required to keep the peace in a community where everyone was armed and tensions ran high. The drive to Miller's Creek took Brennan through some of the most remote territory in Holloway County, along narrow dirt roads that were barely wide enough for one vehicle. This was the kind of country where a person could disappear completely, where the thick forest canopy blocked out most of the sunlight even on clear days. Webb's pickup truck was found at a pull-off near the creek, positioned as if the driver had stopped to check something along the road. The truck itself was a late-model Ford F-150, outfitted with the kind of equipment that serious hunters carried: a rifle rack, hunting decals, and a cooler in the back for transporting game. Dr. Shaw was already on the scene when Brennan arrived, photographing the truck and the surrounding area. Deputy Reeves was helping her, taking measurements and collecting potential evidence. "What do we have, Doc?" "Blood on the driver's seat and steering wheel, consistent with a head wound," she reported. "No sign of a struggle inside the vehicle, which suggests the attack happened after Webb got out of the truck." "Any tracks?" "A few partial footprints leading toward the creek, but the ground is too rocky to get anything useful. Whoever did this knew enough to avoid leaving clear evidence." Brennan examined the message painted on the truck's side. "The hunt continues." The letters were the same style as the notes found with Harrison's body and on Jerry Atwood's door. Red spray paint applied quickly, probably in the dark. "Doc, how much blood are we talking about?" "Enough to suggest a serious injury, but not necessarily fatal. It's possible Webb is still alive somewhere." That thought gave Brennan some hope, but it also added urgency to the investigation. If Webb was alive but injured, time was running out. Deputy Reeves had been searching the area around the truck and called out from near the creek bank, "Sheriff, I found something." Brennan and Dr. Shaw hurried over to where Tommy was kneeling beside the water. He was pointing to a set of drag marks in the muddy bank, as if something heavy had been pulled down to the water's edge. "Looks like someone dragged Webb down here," Tommy said, "but there's no body in the creek." Dr. Shaw knelt beside the drag marks, studying them with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades reading the story that violent crime left behind. "These marks are fresh, probably made within the last few hours, but look at this." She pointed to a series of smaller marks in the mud, parallel to the drag marks. "Rope burns. Someone tied Webb up and dragged him, but he was probably still alive when they moved him." "Why drag him away from the truck?" Brennan asked. "Why not just kill him there?" "Because this killer wants something from Webb," Dr. Shaw said grimly. "Information, maybe. Or they want him alive for some other purpose." Brennan felt his stomach clench. In his experience, when killers kept victims alive, it was rarely for merciful reasons. "Tommy, I want you to organize a search team. Get some volunteers from town, people who know these woods. We need to find Webb before—" He didn't finish the sentence, but they all understood. Before the killer decided Webb had outlived his usefulness. The radio crackled with Martha's voice. "Sheriff, you better get back here. Robert Carver is at the station, and he's got some information you need to hear. Says it's about Marcus Webb." The drive back to town gave Brennan time to think about the pattern that was emerging. David Harrison, the wealthy hunter, murdered and posed as a warning. Jerry Atwood, the local outfitter, threatened but not harmed. Billy Hackett, manipulated into becoming a weapon against innocent people. And now Marcus Webb, the hunting guide, taken alive for unknown purposes. Someone was systematically targeting different levels of the hunting industry in Holloway County. But what was the end game? What did the killer ultimately want to accomplish? Robert Carver was waiting in the sheriff's office, pacing nervously and checking his phone every few seconds. His carefully maintained composure had cracked, revealing the frightened businessman underneath. "Sheriff, I should have told you this earlier, but I was trying to protect my business," Carver began. "Marcus Webb, he wasn't exactly what he seemed to be." Brennan settled into his chair, preparing for another complication. "What do you mean?" "When I hired Marcus 2 years ago, his references were excellent. Too excellent, actually. Perfect recommendations from operations that I later discovered were either out of business or had never heard of him. By the time I figured out he'd lied about his background, he'd already proven himself to be a capable guide, so I let it slide." "What was his real background?" "I don't know for certain, but I think he might have been in some kind of trouble before he came here. He was always nervous about having his picture taken, never wanted to be included in any of our promotional materials, and he paid for everything in cash, never used credit cards or checks." "Did he have problems with any of the clients?" Carver hesitated. "There were incidents. Nothing that resulted in formal complaints, but some guests mentioned that Marcus seemed to have strong opinions about hunting ethics. He disapproved of the guaranteed trophy packages, thought they were unsporting. Strong enough opinions to do something about it. I don't know, but Sheriff, there's something else. Marcus had access to all of our client information. He knew who was coming, when they were arriving, where they planned to hunt. If someone wanted to target our guests—" The implications hit Brennan like a physical blow. Marcus Webb wasn't a victim. He was a suspect. A hunting guide with access to detailed information about wealthy clients. Someone who disapproved of commercial hunting operations. Someone who could move through the woods undetected. But that raised new questions. If Webb was the killer, who had attacked him at Miller's Creek? And why stage his own disappearance? "Mr. Carver, I need a complete list of everyone Webb guided in the past 6 months. Names, addresses, hunting locations, everything. Of course, I'll have my assistant compile it immediately. Also, I need to know about Webb's living situation. Where did he stay? Did he have friends in the area? He rented a cabin from old Sam Whitaker, about 10 miles north of town. Pretty isolated place, back in the hills where you need 4-wheel drive to reach it. As for friends, Carver shrugged. Marcus kept to himself mostly. He did his job and stayed out of everyone's way. Brennan called Deputy Reeves on the radio. "Tommy, meet me at the station. We're going to pay a visit to Marcus Webb's cabin." The drive to Sam Whitaker's property took them deep into the kind of mountain country that most people only saw in movies. The road, if it could be called that, was little more than 2 tire tracks winding through dense forest. Ancient oak and hickory trees formed a canopy so thick that it felt like driving through a green tunnel. Sam Whitaker's main house was a weathered frame structure that had probably been built in the 1940s. Sam himself was sitting on the front porch when they arrived, a man in his 70s with the kind of deep tan that came from a lifetime of outdoor work. He watched their patrol cars approach with the wary expression of someone who had learned not to trust unexpected visitors. "Afternoon, Sam," Brennan called out as he got out of his vehicle. "We need to ask you some questions about Marcus Webb." Sam spat a stream of tobacco juice off the side of his porch. Figured someone would come asking about Marcus sooner or later. Boy's been trouble since the day he showed up. What kind of trouble? The quiet kind. The kind that keeps to himself, but you can tell he's got demons chasing him. Marcus paid his rent on time and didn't cause no problems, but there was always something off about him. "We need to take a look at his cabin." Sam pointed toward a narrow trail that led deeper into the woods. "Follow that path about a 1/4 mile. You'll find the cabin in a clearing by the old quarry. But Sheriff, I gotta tell you, Marcus ain't been home for 3 days." "3 days? When exactly did you last see him?" "Saturday morning. He came by to pay his rent for November, said he might be going out of town for a while. Asked me to keep an eye on his place." That was 2 days before David Harrison's murder. If Webb had been planning something, he'd been preparing for it well in advance. The trail to Webb's cabin was barely wide enough for a man on foot, winding through thick underbrush and around massive boulders that had probably been there since the last ice age. It was the kind of place where someone could hide for months without being discovered, where the outside world felt very far away. The cabin itself was a simple one-room structure, built from local stone and weathered lumber. It had the look of a place where someone lived but didn't really call home. Functional, but without personal touches. A small porch faced east, offering a view of the abandoned quarry that Sam had mentioned. Doors unlocked, Deputy Reeves observed as they approached. Brennan drew his sidearm, not sure what they might find inside. "Tommy, you take the back. I'll go in the front." The interior of the cabin was spartanly furnished. A bed, a small table, 2 chairs, and a wood-burning stove for heat. But it was what covered the walls that made Brennan's blood run cold. Photographs. Dozens of them, all showing wealthy hunters in various poses with their trophy kills. Some were obviously taken at hunting lodges, others in the field. But all of them had been marked with red ink, circles drawn around the hunters' faces, X's marked over their bodies. And in the center of it all was a large map of Holloway County, with colored pins marking the locations of every hunting lodge, outfitter, and guide service in the region. Red pins marked operations that catered to wealthy clients. Black pins marked local operations like Jerry Atwood's business. "Sheriff, you need to see this," Tommy called from the cabin's small back room. Brennan found his deputy standing over a wooden table that served as a makeshift desk. The table was covered with documents, client lists from various hunting operations, newspaper clippings about hunting accidents, and what appeared to be a detailed plan for targeting the county's hunting industry. One document in particular caught Brennan's attention. It was a handwritten manifesto, several pages long, detailing the author's grievances against commercial hunting and his plans for what he called ecological justice. "The wealthy elite treat our forests like their personal playgrounds," one passage read. "They buy their way into experiences that should be earned through respect and understanding of the natural world. They corrupt local guides with money, turning proud hunters into servants of mammon. They must be stopped." Another section outlined a specific strategy. Begin with symbolic violence against the most egregious offenders. Use local grievances to create chaos and misdirection. Turn the community against itself while systematically eliminating the source of the corruption. Tommy, bag all of this as evidence. Every document, every photograph, everything. But even as his deputy began collecting the evidence, Brennan was troubled by something that didn't fit. The manifesto was clearly written by someone with strong opinions about hunting ethics, someone who saw himself as an environmental crusader. But the handwriting didn't match the block letters they'd found in the threatening notes. And there was something else. The manifesto was typed, not handwritten. The threatening notes had been written by hand, in block letters that suggested someone trying to disguise their natural handwriting. "Sheriff," Tommy said, "look at this." He was holding a photograph that had been pinned to the wall separately from the others. It showed Marcus Webb standing next to a large buck. But unlike the other hunting photos, this one hadn't been marked with red ink. Instead, someone had written across the bottom in those same block letters, "The teacher becomes the student." Brennan felt pieces of a very different puzzle beginning to fall into place. Marcus Webb wasn't the killer. He was another victim. Someone had been using his cabin, his research, his identity to plan and execute the attacks on Holloway County's hunting industry. "Tommy, we need to get back to town immediately. I think we've been looking at this all wrong." As they drove back toward civilization, Brennan's mind raced through the implications of what they'd discovered. Someone had been using Marcus Webb's identity and his cabin as a base of operations. Someone who knew enough about Webb's background to impersonate him convincingly. Someone with access to the lodge's client information and the ability to move freely through the hunting community. His radio crackled with Martha's voice, urgent and frightened. "Sheriff, we got multiple reports of gunfire out at Whispering Pines Lodge. Sounds like a war zone out there." "I'm 15 minutes out. Call the state police, tell them we need immediate backup." "Already done." "But Sheriff, there's something else." Robert Carver called about 10 minutes ago. Said he found Marcus Webb's body in one of the lodge's storage buildings. Says he's been dead for days. The pieces were falling into place now, but the picture they formed was more terrifying than Brennan had imagined. Marcus Webb had been dead for days, probably since Saturday when Sam Whitaker last saw him. Someone had killed Webb, taken his identity, and used his access to the lodge to plan and execute the subsequent attacks. But who? And why were they attacking the lodge now, when they could have continued operating under Webb's identity? The answer came to him as he turned onto the road leading to Whispering Pines Lodge, because their plan was accelerating. Because they'd achieved the chaos they wanted, and now they were moving to the final phase. The scene at the lodge was like something from a war movie. Expensive vehicles were scattered around the parking area, some with their doors open as if their owners had fled in panic. Broken glass glittered in the afternoon sun, and the smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. Deputy Reeves arrived just as Brennan was getting out of his patrol car. "Sheriff, what's the situation?" "Unknown, but we go in prepared for anything. They approached the lodge carefully, weapons drawn. The massive front doors were standing open, and they could hear voices from inside, angry, frightened voices arguing about what to do next. "This is Sheriff Brennan," he called out as they entered the main common room. "Everyone put down your weapons and show me your hands." The scene inside was chaotic. A dozen people were scattered around the room, most of them wealthy hunters who were clearly out of their element. Several were holding expensive hunting rifles, pointing them at shadows and jumping at every sound. Robert Carver was trying to maintain some semblance of order, but his face was pale with fear. "Sheriff, thank God you're here," Carver said. "Someone's been shooting at the lodge from the woods. We found Marcus's body in the equipment shed, and then all hell broke loose." "Anyone hurt?" "No, but it's only a matter of time. Whoever's out there has been taking shots at anyone who tries to leave. We're trapped." Brennan looked around the room, counting faces and assessing the situation. These people were scared, armed, and operating on adrenaline. A dangerous combination in any circumstances. "Everyone, listen to me," he said in his most authoritative voice. "I want all weapons pointed at the floor. No one shoots unless I give the order. We're going to resolve this peacefully." One of the hunters, a red-faced man in his 50s wearing enough camouflage to outfit a platoon, spoke up angrily. "Peacefully? This maniac has been shooting at us for the past hour. We have the right to defend ourselves. What you have is the right to follow my instructions if you want to get out of here alive," Brennan replied. "Now, someone tell me exactly what happened." The story that emerged was confusing and contradictory, filtered through fear and adrenaline. But the basic facts were clear. Around 2 p.m., Robert Carver had gone to the equipment shed to retrieve some supplies for an afternoon hunting trip. That's when he'd found Marcus Webb's body, hidden behind some stored furniture. Webb had been shot once in the head, execution style. Based on the condition of the body, he'd been dead for several days. Someone had killed him, and then assumed his identity to gain access to the lodge and its client information. While Carver was calling the sheriff's office to report the discovery, gunshots had erupted from the forest surrounding the lodge. Someone was out there with a high-powered rifle, taking carefully aimed shots at anyone who tried to leave the building. "Did anyone see the shooter?" Brennan asked. "No, but whoever it is knows these woods real well," Carver replied. "They're moving around out there, changing positions, making it impossible to pin them down." Brennan's radio crackled with an update from the state police. "Sheriff, we've got units en route. ETA 20 minutes. Sniper team is being deployed from Louisville, but they won't be on scene for at least 2 hours." 2 hours was too long. The situation inside the lodge was already volatile, and it would only get worse as time went on. Frightened people with guns had a tendency to make bad decisions, and Brennan couldn't afford to have this turn into a bloodbath. "Tommy, I want you to coordinate with the state police when they arrive. Set up a perimeter, but don't let anyone approach the building until we know what we're dealing with." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to try to make contact with our shooter, find out what they want." Brennan approached the lodge's front windows carefully, staying low to avoid presenting a target. The forest beyond the parking area looked peaceful enough, but he knew that appearances could be deceiving. Somewhere in those trees was someone with a rifle and enough skill to keep a dozen people pinned down. He picked up a phone from the reception desk and dialed Martha at the sheriff's office. "Martha, I need you to patch me through to whatever phone system this lodge uses for announcements. I want to broadcast a message to whoever's out there." A moment later, his voice was echoing across the lodge's property through the outdoor speaker system. "This is Sheriff Brennan. I know you can hear me. I want to talk." The response came immediately. A single rifle shot that shattered one of the lodge's front windows, sending glass cascading across the floor. The hunters inside scrambled for cover, shouting and cursing. Brennan tried again. I know you've been wronged. I know you're angry about what's happened to this county's hunting traditions. But this isn't the way to fix it. Another shot, this one taking out a decorative light fixture on the front porch. I found your manifesto at Marcus Webb's cabin. I understand your grievances against commercial hunting operations, but killing innocent people won't solve anything. This time, the response was different. A voice called out from the woods, amplified by some kind of portable speaker system. Innocent? These people are parasites, Sheriff. They come here with their money and their arrogance, treating our forests like a theme park. The voice was electronically distorted, making it impossible to determine if it belonged to a man or woman. But the words were clear enough, filled with the kind of righteous anger that could justify almost any action. I'm willing to listen, Brennan called back. Tell me what you want. I want them gone. All of them. I want the commercial hunting operations shut down, the wealthy clients sent back to their cities, and the forests returned to the people who understand and respect them. That's not something I can deliver, but maybe we can work out some kind of compromise. There can be no compromise with corruption, Sheriff. These people have poisoned everything they've touched. The only solution is to remove the poison entirely. Brennan felt a chill as he realized what they were dealing with. This wasn't just an angry local upset about economic changes. This was someone who had moved beyond rational thought, someone who saw violence as the only solution to a complex problem. What about Marcus Webb? Why did you kill him? Webb was weak. He had access to the information I needed, but he lacked the courage to act on his convictions. I gave him a chance to join me, to help me clean up this mess. When he refused, he became part of the problem. And David Harrison? Harrison was a symbol. A wealthy outsider who thought he could buy his way into experiences that should be earned through respect and understanding. His death was a message. What message? That the old ways are returning. That money can't protect you from justice. That there are consequences for treating sacred places like commodities. Brennan could hear the fanaticism in the distorted voice, the absolute certainty that made reasonable negotiation impossible. This person had moved beyond the realm of ordinary criminal motivation into something approaching religious extremism. His radio crackled with an update from Deputy Reeves. Sheriff, state police are on scene. They're setting up a perimeter, but they want to coordinate with you before making any moves. Tell them to hold position. I'm still trying to negotiate. But, even as he said it, Brennan knew that negotiation was unlikely to succeed. The person in the woods had already crossed too many lines, committed too many acts of violence to simply walk away. They were either going to surrender or fight to the death, and nothing in their words suggested surrender was an option. The voice from the woods spoke again. Sheriff, you have 1 hour to clear everyone out of that lodge and shut down all commercial hunting operations in this county. If you don't, I'll start picking off your wealthy friends one by one. That's not possible, and you know it. Even if I wanted to, I don't have that kind of authority. Then you'd better find someone who does, because I'm not bluffing. To prove the point, another rifle shot rang out. This one so close to the window where Brennan was standing that he could feel the passage of the bullet. The message was clear. The shooter could have killed him any time they wanted to, but they were choosing to let him live for now. Brennan moved away from the window and gathered the people in the lodge's main room. The fear in their faces was palpable, and he could see that some of them were reaching the breaking point. Listen to me carefully, he said. We're dealing with someone who's mentally unstable and heavily armed. The state police are here and we're going to get through this, but I need everyone to stay calm and follow my instructions exactly." The red-faced hunter from earlier spoke up again. "To hell with that. We've got enough firepower in this room to take out whoever's shooting at us. Why don't we just charge out there and end this?" "Because that's exactly what they want," Brennan replied. "They're trying to provoke us into doing something stupid. The moment we start shooting back, people are going to die. People are going to die anyway. At least this way we go down fighting." Brennan could see heads nodding around the room, fear transforming into anger and desperation. He needed to defuse the situation before these frightened amateurs decided to play soldier. "Mr. Carver, is there another way out of this building? Service entrance, back door, anything?" "There's a service corridor that leads to the kitchen, and from there you can access the loading dock. But you'd still have to cross about 50 yards of open ground to reach the tree line." "That's too much exposure. What about underground? Storm drains, utility tunnels?" "Nothing like that. The lodge was built on bedrock, so there's no basement or tunnel system." Brennan's radio crackled with a message from the state police commander. "Sheriff, we've got snipers moving into position, but we need to know more about the target's location. Can you get us any intelligence on where they're positioned?" "Negative. They've been moving around, changing positions every few minutes. Professional-level fieldcraft." "Copy that. We're going to try to flank them, see if we can get a visual." Before Brennan could respond, the lights in the lodge went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Someone had cut the power lines. "That's not good," Deputy Reeves said quietly. The voice from the woods spoke again, this time much closer to the building. "Time's running out, Sheriff. I'm getting impatient." Brennan realized with growing dread that their situation was deteriorating rapidly. The shooter was escalating, moving closer to the building, cutting off utilities. Whatever they were planning, it was building toward a climax. His radio erupted with urgent chatter from the state police units. "Shots fired! Shots fired! We have an officer down!" The sound of gunfire erupted from multiple directions around the lodge, the sharp crack of rifles mixing with the deeper boom of shotguns. The state police had made contact with the shooter, but it sounded like they were taking casualties. Inside the lodge, panic began to spread. People were shouting, running for cover, and several of the hunters were raising their weapons toward the windows. "Everyone stay down," Brennan yelled. "Do not return fire unless you have a clear target." But his words were lost in the chaos. The red-faced hunter pushed past him toward the front door, rifle in hand. "I'm not waiting here to die like a sitting duck." Before Brennan could stop him, the man burst through the front door and into the parking area. He made it perhaps 10 steps before a rifle shot dropped him to the ground, clutching his leg and screaming in pain. "God damn it," Brennan cursed. Now they had a wounded man in the open, and anyone who tried to help him would be exposed to sniper fire. The gunfire outside was intensifying, and through the broken windows Brennan could see muzzle flashes in the forest. The state police were engaged in a running firefight with someone who seemed to know exactly where they were and how to stay one step ahead of them. "Sheriff," Robert Carver said, his voice tight with fear. "What if this isn't just one person? What if there's a whole group of them out there?" The thought had occurred to Brennan as well. The level of coordination, the ability to engage multiple police units simultaneously, the sophisticated planning. It all suggested something more than a lone wolf operation. His radio crackled with an update from the state police commander. "Sheriff, we've got at least 3 different shooting positions identified. Multiple suspects, coordinated movements, professional equipment. This is bigger than we thought. 3 shooters, maybe more. That changed everything." They weren't dealing with a single disturbed individual. They were facing an organized group with military-level training and equipment. "Tommy," Brennan called to his deputy. "Get on the radio to Martha. Tell her to contact the FBI field office in Louisville. We need federal backup." "FBI? You think this is terrorism?" "I think this is beyond our capabilities. These people have been planning this for months, maybe years. They've got detailed intelligence on our hunting industry, sophisticated weapons, and the training to use them effectively." As if to emphasize his point, another volley of gunfire erupted from the woods. This time, several of the lodge's windows exploded inward, sending glass fragments flying across the room. People screamed and dove for cover behind furniture and walls. "They're trying to drive us into a panic," Brennan realized. "They want us to make mistakes." But understanding their strategy didn't make it any easier to counter. The people in the lodge were civilians, not trained law enforcement officers. They were reaching the limits of their endurance, and when people got desperate enough, they stopped thinking rationally. The wounded hunter in the parking lot was still screaming, his voice echoing off the lodge's walls. Two of his companions were arguing about whether to try to rescue him, their voices growing louder and more heated with each passing minute. "I'm going out there," one of them finally declared. "Bill's my brother-in-law. I can't just leave him to bleed to death." "It's suicide," the other man replied. "Soon as you step outside, they'll cut you down, too." "Then what do you suggest? We just listen to him scream until he dies?" Brennan knew he had to do something before the situation deteriorated further. "I'll go," he said. "I'm wearing body armor, and I've got the training for this kind of situation." "Sheriff, that's crazy," Deputy Reeves protested. "You'll be completely exposed out there." "Maybe, but I can't ask civilians to take risks that I'm not willing to take myself." Before anyone could argue further, Brennan moved toward the lodge's front door. He checked his sidearm, adjusted his body armor, and took a deep breath. "If something happens to me, Tommy, you're in charge until the feds arrive. Keep these people calm and don't let them do anything stupid." "Sheriff." "That's an order, Deputy." Brennan pushed through the front door and into the nightmare outside. The wounded hunter was lying about 30 feet away, clutching his leg and moaning. Blood was pooling beneath him, dark against the gravel parking area. The world seemed unnaturally quiet as Brennan began moving toward the injured man. His senses were hyper-alert, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement, any hint of where the next shot might come from. He made it halfway to the wounded hunter before the voice spoke again, this time from a speaker much closer to the building. "Very brave, Sheriff, but ultimately pointless." Brennan didn't respond, continuing his careful advance toward the wounded man. 20 feet, 15, 10. "You can't save them all, you know. This is just the beginning." 5 feet from the wounded hunter, Brennan dropped to one knee and began assessing the man's injuries. The bullet had shattered his left femur, causing significant bleeding but probably not life-threatening damage if they could get him medical attention quickly. "Can you walk?" Brennan asked. "I don't think so," the man gasped. "Legs broken bad." Brennan looked back toward the lodge, calculating distances and angles. It was going to be a difficult rescue under the best circumstances, and these were far from the best circumstances. "I'm going to carry you back to the building," he told the wounded man. "When I pick you up, try to stay as low as possible." He was preparing to lift the injured hunter when the voice from the woods spoke again. "I'm going to give you a choice, Sheriff. You can save this one man, or you can save all the others. But you can't save both." "What do you mean?" "I mean that while you're playing hero out there, my associates are preparing to assault the lodge. You have about 60 seconds to decide what matters more to you." Brennan felt ice form in his stomach. It was a trap. designed to force him into an impossible choice. Save one wounded man and potentially lose a dozen others, or abandon the wounded man to protect the group. The sound of gunfire erupted from the back of the lodge, confirming his worst fears. The shooters had been using the rescue attempt as a distraction while they moved into position for a direct assault on the building. "Sorry," he told the wounded hunter. "I'll be back for you." He sprinted toward the lodge's front entrance, his body armor feeling heavy and awkward as he ran. Behind him, he could hear the wounded man calling out in fear and pain, but there was nothing he could do about that now. Inside the lodge, chaos reigned. Several windows had been shot out, and people were huddled behind whatever cover they could find. Deputy Reeves was trying to organize a defense, but the civilians were too frightened to follow complex instructions. "Tommy, what's the situation?" "Multiple shooters approaching from the rear. They've got us pinned down pretty good." Brennan moved to one of the back windows and peered carefully outside. He could see muzzle flashes in the tree line, at least 3 different positions. The shooters were maintaining steady pressure, not trying to storm the building, but keeping everyone inside too scared to move. This is a siege, he realized. They're going to wear us down until we make mistakes. His radio crackled with an update from the state police. "Sheriff, federal agents are en route. ETA 90 minutes. Can you hold position until then?" 90 minutes. It might as well have been 90 hours. The people in the lodge were already on the edge of panic, and the shooters outside seemed to have unlimited ammunition and patience. "We'll do our best," Brennan replied, though he wasn't sure how they were going to accomplish that. The answer came sooner than he expected. Robert Carver approached him with a grim expression, and a set of building plans spread across his hands. "Sheriff, there might be another option. When we built this place, we installed a panic room in the basement. It's designed to withstand pretty much anything short of a direct missile strike. How many people can it hold? Maybe 8 or 10 if they're willing to get real friendly with each other." Brennan counted heads. There were 14 people in the lodge, plus himself and Deputy Reeves. The panic room wouldn't hold everyone. "There's another problem," Carver continued. "The entrance to the panic room is through my private office, which is on the opposite side of the building from where we are now. We'd have to cross the main common area to reach it. That meant exposing themselves to gunfire from multiple directions. Some of them might make it, but others would certainly be hit. What kind of security does the panic room have? Independent power supply, communications equipment, enough food and water for a week. Once we're inside, we can contact the outside world and coordinate with law enforcement." It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than sitting in the main room waiting to be picked off one by one. Brennan looked around at the frightened faces surrounding him and made a decision. "We're going to try for the panic room, but we do this smart and coordinated. No one moves until I give the signal." He organized the group into 3 teams. The first team would consist of himself, Deputy Reeves, and 4 of the hunters. They would move fast and provide covering fire for the others. The second team would be Robert Carver and 4 more civilians. The third team would be the remaining people, including 2 women who had been at the lodge as observers rather than hunters. When I say go, the first team moves toward Carver's office. We'll take up positions to cover the second team's movement. Once they're in position, they'll cover the third team. Everyone clear? Heads nodded around the room, though several people looked like they were about to be sick. "Remember, stay low, move fast, and don't stop for anything. If someone gets hit, the rest of the team keeps moving. We can't afford to have everyone get pinned down trying to help one person." It was a harsh calculation, but it was the reality of their situation. In a firefight, sentiment could get everyone killed. Brennan checked his watch. "On my mark. 3, 2, 1, go." The first team erupted from their positions and sprinted across the lodge's main common area. Immediately, gunfire erupted from outside as the shooters responded to the movement. Windows exploded, wooden furniture splintered, and the air filled with the smell of gunpowder and fear. Brennan reached the corridor leading to Carver's office and spun around to provide covering fire. Through the shattered windows, he could see muzzle flashes in the trees. He emptied his clip in their direction, not expecting to hit anything but hoping to make the shooters duck long enough for the second team to move. "Team 2, go!" Robert Carver led his group across the danger zone, his face pale but determined. One of the hunters stumbled and nearly fell, but his companions grabbed him and hauled him toward safety. They almost made it. Almost. The gunfire from outside intensified just as the second team reached the halfway point. One of the hunters cried out and spun to the ground, blood spreading across his hunting jacket. His companions hesitated, torn between helping him and reaching safety. "Keep moving," Brennan shouted. "Don't stop." It went against every human instinct, but it was the only way. The wounded hunter waved weakly, understanding what had to happen. His companions reluctantly continued toward the corridor, leaving him behind. "Team 3, go!" The final group consisted entirely of non-combatants, people who had never been in a firefight and were running on pure adrenaline. They moved more slowly than the others, staying low, but lacking the tactical awareness that might have kept them safer. Halfway across the room, one of the women stumbled and fell. She landed hard, crying out in pain and fear. The man beside her stopped to help, exposing both of them to the gunfire pouring through the windows. Deputy Reeves didn't hesitate. He sprinted back into the danger zone, grabbed both civilians, and half-carried, half-dragged them toward the corridor. Bullets kicked up splinters around his feet, but somehow he made it to safety with both people intact. "Everyone accounted for?" Brennan asked as he reloaded his weapon. Carver was doing a quick head count. "We lost 2 people back there, but the rest are here. 2 people left behind, wounded and possibly dying while the rest of them sought safety. It was a tactical necessity, but it felt like a betrayal nonetheless." Carver led them down a narrow hallway to his private office, a spacious room decorated with expensive hunting trophies and photographs of satisfied clients. But it was what lay hidden behind a bookshelf that interested Brennan now. "Help me move this," Carver said, pushing against the bookshelf. It swung aside on hidden hinges, revealing a steel door with an electronic lock. "Biometric scanner," Carver explained as he pressed his thumb to a small screen. "Only responds to my fingerprint and my partner's." The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a small room lined with monitors and communication equipment. It was cramped but well appointed, with supplies that could sustain a small group for several days. "Everyone inside," Brennan ordered. "Quickly." As the last person squeezed into the panic room, Brennan took a final look back down the hallway. Somewhere in the lodge behind them, 2 wounded people were waiting for help that might never come. The weight of that decision would stay with him for the rest of his life. The panic room door sealed with a solid thunk, cutting off the sounds of gunfire from outside. For the first time in hours, they were truly safe. But safety came with its own burden of guilt and helplessness. "The communications array is fully operational," Carver said, checking the bank of monitors that showed different views of the lodge's exterior. "We can coordinate with law enforcement from here." Brennan immediately got on the radio with the state police commander. "This is Sheriff Brennan. We've got most of our people secured, but we have wounded left behind in the main building." "Copy that, Sheriff. We're aware of the casualties. Federal agents are now 30 minutes out, and we're preparing for a coordinated assault on the shooter positions." "How many shooters are we dealing with?" Best estimate is 4 to 6 individuals, all heavily armed and showing professional-level tactics. They've got the lodge surrounded and are maintaining discipline under fire. This isn't some amateur operation. Through the panic room's monitors, Brennan could see the truth of that assessment. The shooters had positioned themselves to cover all approaches to the lodge, and they were maintaining their positions despite the arrival of state police reinforcements. Whoever these people were, they had military training and the equipment to use it effectively. "Sheriff," one of the hunters said, "who are these people? What do they want?" It was a good question, and one that Brennan wasn't sure he could answer completely. "Near as I can tell, there's some kind of extremist group opposed to commercial hunting. They see operations like this lodge as a corruption of traditional hunting values. So they're killing people over hunting ethics? They're killing people because they've decided that violence is the only way to solve what they see as a fundamental problem. In their minds, they're not murderers. They're environmental warriors fighting to save something sacred." Robert Carver was monitoring the communications equipment, his face growing paler by the minute. "Sheriff, I'm picking up radio chatter from outside. I think they're planning something big." Brennan moved to the communications console and listened to the crackling voices on multiple frequencies. What he heard made his blood run cold. Phase 3 initiated. Charges are in position. Confirm. Building will be leveled in 15 minutes. All units withdraw to safe distance. No survivors. Explosive charges. They weren't planning to take prisoners or make demands. They were planning to destroy the entire lodge with everyone inside. "We need to evacuate immediately," Brennan said. "They're going to blow the building." "The panic room is designed to survive explosions," Carver protested. "We should be safe here." "Not from military-grade explosives. If they level the building, we'll be buried alive." The irony wasn't lost on him. The panic room that was supposed to be their salvation was about to become their tomb. "Is there another way out?" Deputy Reeves asked. Carver was studying the building plan spread across the room's central table. "There's an emergency exit that leads to a tunnel system. It was designed as an escape route in case the main building was compromised." "Where does it come out?" "About 200 yards into the forest, near the old stone quarry. But Sheriff, if they've got the building surrounded..." "They'll be watching the tunnel exit too," Brennan finished. "But it's our only chance." He got back on the radio with the state police. "Commander, we have intelligence that the suspects are planning to detonate explosives in the building. We're evacuating through an emergency tunnel, but we'll need covering fire at the exit point." "Understood. Can you give us coordinates for the exit?" Carver provided the GPS coordinates while Brennan gathered the people in the panic room. "Listen carefully. We're going to move through an underground tunnel to an exit in the forest. When we come up, we'll be in a potential kill zone. Stay low, move fast, and follow my lead exactly." The tunnel entrance was hidden behind another false wall in the panic room. It opened onto a narrow concrete passage that had been carved directly through the bedrock beneath the lodge. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the air was stale and humid. "Single file," Brennan ordered. "Keep moving no matter what you hear from above." They had been in the tunnel for perhaps 5 minutes when the world exploded above them. The sound was deafening, a sustained roar that seemed to go on forever. Dust and debris rained down from the tunnel ceiling, and the emergency lights flickered ominously. "Keep moving," Brennan shouted over the noise. "Don't stop." Behind them, Whispering Pines Lodge was being systematically destroyed by carefully placed explosive charges. Everything that Robert Carver had built, everything that represented the new economy in Holloway County, was being reduced to rubble and memories. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, a claustrophobic passage through solid rock that felt like a throat waiting to swallow them. Several of the civilians were starting to panic, their breathing rapid and shallow in the confined space. "How much further?" someone asked. "Almost there," Carver replied, though his voice carried no confidence. Finally, they reached the tunnel's end, a steel ladder leading up to another secured door. Brennan climbed first, checking the electronic lock and the small periscope that showed the area outside. Through the periscope, he could see forest and undergrowth. No obvious signs of the shooters, but that didn't mean they weren't there. These people had shown themselves to be extremely thorough in their planning. "I'm going up first," he told the others. "If it's clear, I'll signal for the rest of you. If shooting starts, go back down the tunnel and wait." "Wait for what?" Deputy Reeves asked. "For the cavalry to arrive." Brennan opened the tunnel exit and emerged into the late afternoon sunlight. The forest was eerily quiet, with none of the normal sounds of wildlife that should have been present. That was a bad sign. Animals avoided areas where there had been recent violence. He moved carefully away from the tunnel entrance, scanning the surrounding trees for any sign of movement. Behind him, he could see a pillar of smoke rising from the direction of the lodge. The explosions had done their work thoroughly. 50 yards from the tunnel, he found what he was looking for: a clear field of fire that would allow the state police snipers to provide covering fire for the evacuation. He signaled for the others to come up. One by one, the survivors emerged from the tunnel and moved toward the rally point Brennan had identified. They were almost all clear when the shooting started. The first shot came from directly overhead, a sniper positioned in the canopy of a massive oak tree. The bullet passed so close to Brennan's head that he could feel the wind of its passage. "Sniper! Everyone down!" The group scattered, seeking whatever cover they could find among the trees and rocks. Brennan could see the muzzle flash from the sniper's position, but the shooter was well concealed and in an excellent tactical position. More shots followed, but these were different: the sharp crack of high-powered rifles from multiple directions. The state police snipers had identified the threat and were returning fire. "This is Brennan," he called into his radio. "We have survivors in the open. Coordinates." He rattled off their GPS position. "We need immediate extraction." "Copy that, Sheriff. Extraction team is en route. Hold position for 3 minutes." 3 minutes might as well have been 3 hours. The firefight in the forest canopy was intensifying, with shots echoing back and forth between the trees. Occasionally, debris would rain down as bullets struck branches and bark. Deputy Reeves had found cover behind a large boulder and was returning fire with his service weapon. It was largely ineffective at this range, but it might force the shooters to keep their heads down. "Tommy, conserve your ammunition," Brennan called out. "Let the state police handle the long-range work." But even as he said it, Brennan could see that the situation was deteriorating. More shooters were revealing their positions, and it was becoming clear that they had the area completely surrounded. The survivors were trapped in a kill zone with limited cover and no way to retreat. That's when the helicopters arrived. The sound came first, the distinctive whop-whop-whop of military rotors cutting through the air. Then the aircraft themselves appeared over the treetops, 2 black helicopters that looked like something from a war movie. "Federal agents," Brennan breathed. "About time." The helicopters didn't land. Instead, they hovered over the forest while heavily armed agents fast-roped down into the trees. Within seconds, the nature of the firefight changed completely. The agents moved through the forest with professional efficiency, their communications coordinated and their tactics flawless. They had night vision equipment, body armor, and weapons that made the shooters' rifles look like toys. "This is Agent Sarah Valdez, FBI Hostage Rescue Team," a voice crackled over Brennan's radio. "Sheriff, we have your position. Stay down while we clear the area." The final phase of the battle lasted less than 10 minutes. The shooters, for all their preparation and training, were no match for a federal tactical team with superior equipment and unlimited backup. One by one, their positions were overrun or abandoned. When the shooting finally stopped, the forest felt empty and lifeless. Smoke drifted through the trees, and the smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. But the nightmare was finally over. Agent Valdez approached Brennan's position, her tactical gear making her look like something from a science fiction movie. She was a woman in her 40s with the kind of competent bearing that suggested extensive field experience. "Sheriff Brennan, I'm Agent Valdez. Are you and your people all right? We've got some wounded back at the lodge, assuming the building is still standing. And there are casualties from earlier in the day. The lodge was completely destroyed, but we've recovered the wounded, and they're being evacuated to the hospital. What can you tell me about the suspects?" Brennan gave her a quick summary of the day's events, from David Harrison's murder through the siege at the lodge. Valdez listened with the focused attention of someone trained to extract crucial details from chaotic situations. "How many shooters did you identify?" she asked. "At least 4, maybe 6. They had military-level training and equipment, professional coordination and communications. We recovered 5 bodies and 1 prisoner. The survivor is being transported to Louisville for interrogation." Valdez paused, consulting her tactical notes. "Sheriff, this wasn't just about hunting ethics. We found evidence that this group was planning similar attacks on hunting operations throughout the southeastern United States." "A nationwide campaign?" "Looks like it. They had detailed files on hunting lodges, outfitters, and guides from Tennessee to Georgia. This was just their opening move." The implications were staggering. If Valdez was right, David Harrison's murder had been the first shot in what could have become a sustained terrorist campaign against the hunting industry across multiple states. "Who were they?" "We're still identifying them, but preliminary indications suggest they were all former military. Special forces, rangers, that kind of background. Highly trained individuals who became radicalized after leaving the service." "Radicalized by what?" "That's what we're hoping to learn from the survivor. But based on the manifesto we found at Marcus Webb's cabin, it seems to be a combination of environmental extremism and anti-government sentiment. They saw commercial hunting as a symbol of everything wrong with modern America." Brennan thought about Marcus Webb, the hunting guide who had been murdered simply because he had access to information the terrorists needed. Webb had probably never even known what was happening until it was too late. "Agent Valdez, what happens now?" "Now, we clean up the mess and try to figure out how to prevent this from happening again. The Bureau will be conducting a thorough investigation of hunting-related businesses throughout the region, looking for any signs of additional terrorist cells. And Holloway County? Holloway County will heal, Sheriff. It's going to take time, and there will be changes. But communities like this one are tougher than most people realize." As the federal agents began processing the crime scene and coordinating the evacuation of survivors, Brennan found himself thinking about the price that had been paid for this victory. David Harrison was dead, murdered for the crime of being wealthy enough to afford an expensive hunting trip. Marcus Webb was dead, killed for refusing to cooperate with terrorists. 2 hunters had died in the siege at the lodge, and several others would carry physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. The economic impact would be devastating as well. Whispering Pines Lodge had been completely destroyed, representing millions of dollars in lost investment and dozens of jobs that would disappear with it. Other hunting operations would suffer as word of the attack spread, driving away clients who no longer felt safe visiting rural areas. But perhaps most troubling of all was the realization that this kind of violence could happen anywhere, at any time. The terrorists hadn't been foreign enemies or urban extremists. They had been American military veterans who had somehow been twisted into believing that mass murder was an acceptable response to economic and social changes they didn't like. Deputy Reeves approached as Brennan was lost in these dark thoughts. "Sheriff, the state police want to know if you need anything. Medical attention, transportation, whatever." "I'm fine, Tommy. Just trying to process everything that's happened." "Hell of a thing. You think it's really over?" Brennan looked around at the smoke-filled forest, the federal agents processing evidence, the media helicopters that were beginning to circle overhead like vultures. "This part is over, but something tells me the larger problem is just getting started." "What do you mean?" "I mean that for every terrorist cell like this one that gets caught, there are probably others out there that we don't know about. People who feel like they've been left behind by economic changes, who blame outsiders for their problems, who think violence is the only way to make their voices heard." It was a sobering thought, but one that Brennan knew he would have to grapple with in the days and weeks to come. Law enforcement in rural America was changing, evolving to meet threats that previous generations of sheriffs had never had to consider. The drive back to town took them past the smoldering ruins of Whispering Pines Lodge. The building had been reduced to a blackened foundation and scattered debris, a monument to the destructive power of extremist ideology. Fire trucks were still on scene, pouring water on the smoking remains. 23 people were in that building when the shooting started, Deputy Reeves observed. If it wasn't for that panic room in the tunnel, 23 people would be dead, and we'd be looking at one of the worst mass casualty events in Kentucky history. Brennan finished. Sometimes you get lucky. But luck, he knew, wasn't something you could count on. The next time something like this happened, and Agent Valdez seemed certain there would be a next time, they would need to be better prepared. Back at the sheriff's office, Brennan found himself facing a different kind of chaos. Media crews had descended on Holloway County like a plague of locusts, turning the normally quiet town into a circus of satellite trucks and reporters. Everyone wanted to know how a terrorist attack could happen in such a peaceful, rural community. Martha greeted him with a cup of coffee and a sympathetic expression. "Sheriff, I got about 50 reporters wanting to talk to you. The governor's office on line 3 and the FBI asking for copies of every case file we've generated in the past 6 months. Tell the reporters I'll have a statement later. Transfer the governor to Agent Valdez. This is a federal investigation now, and give the FBI whatever they want." "How you holding up?" It was a simple question, but one that Brennan wasn't sure how to answer. He'd been in law enforcement for over 20 years, had seen his share of violence and tragedy, but nothing had prepared him for the calculated brutality of what had happened today. "I keep thinking about the choices we had to make," he said finally. "Leaving wounded people behind, forcing civilians to run through gunfire, making tactical decisions that I knew would get people killed. You saved lives today, Marcus, a lot of lives. And lost some too." Martha nodded, understanding the weight he was carrying. In small communities like Holloway County, every death was personal. These weren't just statistics or case numbers. They were neighbors, friends, people whose families would be grieving for years to come. "Sheriff?" Deputy Reeves stuck his head into the office. "Agent Valdez wants to brief you on what they learned from the prisoner." The briefing took place in the conference room that normally hosted county commission meetings and other mundane government business. Today, it felt like a war room, with federal agents, state police officials, and local law enforcement crowded around a table covered with evidence photos and tactical maps. "The prisoner's name is James Crawford," Agent Valdez began. "Former Army Ranger, 3 tours in Afghanistan, honorably discharged in 2018. He's been talking, and what he's telling us is disturbing. She activated a laptop computer that displayed a map of the southeastern United States. Red dots marked locations throughout Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, and the Carolinas. Crawford's group called themselves the Traditional Hunters Alliance. Their stated goal was to eliminate commercial hunting operations and return hunting to what they considered its pure, traditional roots. They saw wealthy outsiders and large-scale hunting businesses as a corruption of something sacred. "How many cells were there?" Brennan asked. Crawford claims there were at least 12 active cells, each responsible for a specific geographic region. The Holloway County attack was meant to be the opening shot in a coordinated campaign that would have targeted hunting lodges, outfitters, and guides throughout the region. Meant to be? Crawford's arrest and the destruction of his cell has compromised the entire network. We're coordinating with law enforcement agencies throughout the Southeast to identify and arrest the other cell members before they can act. Agent Valdez clicked to the next slide, which showed photographs of the 5 dead terrorists. They all looked like ordinary middle-aged men, the kind of people you might see at any rural gas station or diner. All former military, all with exemplary service records. No criminal histories, no previous involvement with extremist groups. They were recruited through online forums dedicated to traditional hunting practices and gradually radicalized over a period of months. Recruited by who? That's the million-dollar question. Crawford insists that the leadership of the Traditional Hunters Alliance operated through encrypted communications and that he never met them face-to-face. But someone had to be coordinating this operation, providing funding and equipment. Brennan studied the photographs, trying to understand how decorated veterans could be twisted into believing that mass murder was justified. What turned them? Economic displacement seems to be a common factor. All of them had struggled to find work after leaving the military. Several had lost jobs to automation or foreign competition. They felt betrayed by a country they had served faithfully, abandoned by a system that no longer had a place for their skills. And they blamed hunters? They blamed what hunting had become. In their minds, traditional hunting was about respect for nature, self-reliance, and earning your success through skill and patience. Commercial hunting operations represented everything wrong with modern America. Wealth buying privilege, tradition being corrupted by money, outsiders coming in and ruining local communities. It was a twisted logic, but Brennan could see how it might appeal to people who felt powerless and forgotten. The hunting industry had changed dramatically in recent decades, with wealthy clients increasingly drawn to luxury lodges that offered guaranteed success rather than traditional guides who provided knowledge and hard work. What happens to Crawford? He'll be charged under federal terrorism statutes, life in prison without the possibility of parole, assuming he cooperates fully with our investigation. And the other cells? We've already arrested 6 individuals in Tennessee and Georgia. The others seem to have gone underground, but we'll find them eventually. Agent Valdez closed her laptop and gathered her files. "Sheriff, I want you to know that your actions today probably prevented a much larger tragedy. If the Traditional Hunters Alliance had been allowed to carry out their full plan, we could have been looking at hundreds of casualties across multiple states. It was small comfort, given the price that had already been paid, but perhaps the deaths in Holloway County would serve as a warning that would save lives elsewhere." After the federal agents left, Brennan found himself alone in his office for the first time since David Harrison's body had been discovered that morning. It felt like a lifetime ago, though less than 12 hours had actually passed. He thought about the choices that had led to this moment, the decisions, both large and small, that had shaped the day's events. If Marcus Webb had refused to provide information to the terrorists, would he still be alive? If Billy Hackett hadn't been manipulated by grief and anger, would he have become involved at all? If Brennan had handled the siege differently, could more lives have been saved? These were questions that would haunt him for years to come, part of the psychological burden that came with wearing a badge in a violent world. But they were also questions that he couldn't afford to dwell on now. There was still work to be done. The phone rang, interrupting his brooding. It was Dr. Shaw, calling from the hospital where the wounded were being treated. "Marcus, I thought you'd want to know that all the survivors are going to make it. The 2 hunters who were left behind in the lodge both have serious injuries, but they'll recover completely with time." "That's good news, Doc. What about the psychological impact?" "That's going to take longer to heal. Several of them are showing signs of severe trauma. They're going to need counseling, maybe for years." Brennan wasn't surprised. Civilians who survived mass violence often carried invisible wounds that took longer to heal than physical injuries. Holloway County would need to find ways to help these people rebuild their lives. "Doc, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Could we have done anything differently? Could we have saved more lives?" There was a long pause before Dr. Shaw answered. "Marcus, I've been dealing with violent death for 40 years. I've seen every kind of tragedy you can imagine, and I can tell you that what happened today was the result of careful planning by dangerous people who were committed to causing maximum harm. You and your people responded as well as anyone could have under impossible circumstances. But people died? Yes, people died, and that's tragic. But a lot more people would have died if you hadn't been there to make the hard choices." After Dr. Shaw hung up, Brennan sat in the growing darkness of his office, thinking about the future of law enforcement in Holloway County. The events of the day had exposed vulnerabilities that would need to be addressed, gaps in training and equipment that could prove fatal in future emergencies. Rural sheriff's departments across the country would need to adapt to the reality of domestic terrorism, training for threats that had once seemed unimaginable in small farming communities. The days when the biggest worry was drunk drivers and domestic disputes were over. But perhaps most importantly, they would need to find ways to address the underlying conditions that bred extremism. Economic displacement, social isolation, and the feeling that rapid change was leaving entire communities behind. Deputy Reeves knocked on the office door, carrying a stack of paperwork that would need to be completed before the day was officially over. "Sheriff, the FBI wants complete incident reports from everyone who was involved. They're particularly interested in the timeline of events and any communications we had with the suspects." "We'll get it done, Tommy. But first, I want you to go home and get some rest. It's been a hell of a day." "What about you?" Brennan looked at the pile of paperwork, thought about the media crew still camped outside, and considered the phone calls he would need to make to the families of the people who had died. "I'll be here for a while longer." As Deputy Reeves left, Brennan began the slow, methodical process of documenting the day's events for the federal investigation. Each report would become part of a larger file that would help law enforcement agencies across the country understand how domestic terrorism could emerge in rural communities. Outside his window, Holloway County was settling into an uneasy quiet. The media crews would pack up and move on to the next story. The federal agents would return to their field offices, and the tourists who had been drawn by the violence would eventually lose interest. But the community would remain, scarred but resilient, forced to confront the reality that the modern world's problems could reach even the most remote corners of rural America. The healing would take time, and some wounds might never fully close. Sheriff Marcus Brennan had learned that morning that his county was not immune to the darker currents of contemporary American life. By evening, He had learned that sometimes the best a good man could do was stand between the innocent and the chaos, making impossible choices in the hope that some lives could be saved. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his career. A reminder that in a world where ideology could justify any atrocity, the thin blue line was sometimes all that stood between civilization and barbarism. The price of peace, he now understood, was eternal vigilance, and the willingness to pay whatever cost that vigilance demanded. As he worked through the night, documenting the day's tragedy for posterity, Sheriff Brennan could only hope that the sacrifice made by the people of Holloway County would serve as a warning that would help prevent similar tragedies elsewhere. In the end, that might be the only meaning to be found in the senseless violence that had shattered his quiet rural community. The hunt was over, but the healing had only just begun. Sheriff Elena Vasquez had been in law enforcement for 18 years, but she'd never seen anything quite like what Deputy Martinez was showing her on his laptop screen. The genealogy website displayed a family tree that looked more like a criminal conspiracy chart, with names connected by lines that told a story of secrets buried for over half a century. "Sheriff, this is why the Whitmore case keeps getting stranger," Martinez said, pointing to a cluster of names highlighted in yellow. "Look at these dates. Look at these connections." The call had come in 3 days earlier. Human remains discovered in the basement of the old Whitmore farmhouse during a renovation project. What should have been a straightforward cold case investigation had quickly evolved into something far more complex. The bones weren't just old. They belonged to multiple individuals, buried at different times spanning decades. "Walk me through it again, Carlos," Elena said, settling into her chair with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Outside the windows of the Esperanza County Sheriff's Department, the New Mexico desert stretched toward mountains that had witnessed more secrets than anyone could count. The contractor found the first set of remains on Monday. Male, approximately 30 years old, buried sometime in the 1970s based on the artifacts found with the body. But when the forensics team expanded their search, they found 2 more burial sites, one from the 1950s, another from the 1990s. Elena studied the crime scene photographs spread across her desk. The Whitmore property was a sprawling ranch about 20 miles outside the town of Cedar Ridge, isolated enough that someone could bury bodies without fear of discovery. The farmhouse itself was a 2-story structure built in the 1920s, surrounded by outbuildings that had seen better days. 3 separate burials, spanning 4 decades. That suggests a pattern, not random killings. That's what I thought too. So I started digging into the Whitmore family history, trying to understand who might have had access to the property during those time periods. Martinez pulled up another screen on his laptop. That's when things got really interesting. The Whitmore family had owned the ranch for 3 generations, passing it down from father to son in an unbroken chain. But the genealogy research had revealed something disturbing, a pattern of missing persons cases that seemed to follow the family wherever they went. "Look at this," Martinez said, highlighting a section of the family tree. Samuel Whitmore, the patriarch, moved to New Mexico from Oklahoma in 1947. In Oklahoma, there were 3 unsolved disappearances between 1943 and 1946, all young men who had been seen arguing with Samuel over various business disputes. Could be coincidence, maybe. But Samuel's son, Robert Whitmore, had his own problems. Between 1965 and 1980, 5 people went missing in Esperanza County. All of them had some kind of conflict with Robert. A business partner who accused him of fraud, a neighbor who complained about property lines, a ranch hand who threatened to report safety violations. Elena felt a familiar chill as the pattern became clear. And Robert's son? Michael Whitmore, 3 disappearances between 1985 and 1995. Same pattern. People who had crossed the family or posed some kind of threat to their interests. The implications were staggering. If Martinez's research was accurate, they weren't dealing with a single killer or even a crime spree. They were looking at a family tradition of murder that had continued for over 50 years, with each generation adding their own victims to the collection buried beneath the farmhouse. Where's Michael Whitmore now? That's the problem. He died in a car accident in 2003. The property has been tied up in probate ever since, which is why it's only now being renovated. But Sheriff, there's something else. Michael had a son. Elena's blood went cold. Please tell me he doesn't live in Esperanza County. David Whitmore, age 34, lives in Cedar Ridge, works as a contractor, married with 2 young children, and according to his wife, he's been acting strange lately. Strange how? She called the non-emergency line yesterday, said her husband has been having nightmares and talking in his sleep about family obligations and keeping the secrets. She's worried he might be having some kind of breakdown. Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the desert landscape that had hidden so many secrets for so long. If the pattern held, David Whitmore was the latest in a line of killers, inheriting not just property but a legacy of violence that stretched back decades. Carlos, I want you to put together a complete timeline. Every disappearance, every death, every connection to the Whitmore family. Cross-reference with missing persons reports from surrounding counties. And I want surveillance on David Whitmore, but keep it subtle. If he's following the family pattern, there might be recent victims we haven't found yet. Already started on the timeline, but Sheriff, there's something else you need to know. I think the family had help. Help? Some of these disappearances were reported to local law enforcement, but the investigations were either cursory or abandoned entirely, like someone was making sure the cases didn't get too much attention. Elena felt her stomach drop. Police corruption was always a possibility in small communities where everyone knew everyone else, where family connections and economic interests could influence justice. If the Whitmore family had been buying protection from corrupt officials, it would explain how they had managed to operate for so long without detection. Who was sheriff during the peak years? That's the really interesting part. Between 1965 and 1995, there were 3 different sheriffs: William Casey, Thomas Brennan, and Rita Sandoval. But all 3 had financial connections to the Whitmore family. Martinez pulled up another screen showing property records and business licenses. Casey took out a loan from Robert Whitmore's bank in 1967. Brennan's construction company did extensive work on Whitmore properties throughout the 1970s and 1980s. And Sandoval's husband was a business partner in one of Michael Whitmore's ventures. Jesus Christ. How deep does this go? I don't know yet. But Sheriff, I think we need to be very careful about who we trust with this information. If there's still corruption in the system, if people are still protecting the Whitmore family, Elena understood the implication. If they moved too quickly or shared information with the wrong people, evidence could disappear, and David Whitmore could be warned to flee or destroy evidence. They would need to investigate carefully, using only personnel they could trust completely. Who else knows about this? Just you, me, and the forensics team from the State Crime Lab. I've been keeping everything compartmentalized. Good. Keep it that way for now. I want to visit the Whitmore property myself, see what we're dealing with firsthand. The drive to the Whitmore ranch took Elena through some of the most beautiful and desolate country in New Mexico. Red rock formations jutted up from the desert floor like the bones of ancient giants, and the silence was so complete that it felt almost oppressive. It was the kind of landscape where secrets could be buried and forgotten, where screams would echo unheard across empty miles. The farmhouse sat in a small valley surrounded by low hills, accessible only by a single dirt road that wound through arroyos and past stands of juniper and pinyon pine. It was an ideal location for someone who valued privacy, but it was also perfect for someone who needed to dispose of bodies without detection. The forensics team from the state crime lab was still on scene, carefully excavating the basement area where the remains had been found. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the chief forensic anthropologist, met Elena at the front door of the house. "Sheriff Vasquez, I'm glad you're here. We've made some significant discoveries since yesterday." Dr. Walsh was a woman in her 50s, with the kind of methodical precision that came from years of studying violent death. She led Elena through the house to the basement entrance where bright work lights had been set up to illuminate the excavation area. "As Deputy Martinez probably told you, we've identified 3 distinct burial sites so far. But there's something else. Look at this." She led Elena to a corner of the basement where a section of the concrete floor had been carefully removed. Beneath it, the earth was dark and rich, as if it had been disturbed many times over the years. "This isn't just a burial site," Dr. Walsh explained. "It's a disposal system. The concrete could be removed and replaced relatively easily, allowing for multiple burials in the same location. And look at this." She pointed to a series of metal rings embedded in the basement walls. These appeared to be anchor points for chains or ropes. Combined with the soundproofing material we found in the walls, it suggests this basement was used to hold victims before they were killed. Elena felt her stomach churn as she imagined the horror that had taken place in this underground chamber. How many victims are we talking about? Based on the bone fragments and dental remains we've recovered so far, at least 12 individuals, but we're only about halfway through the excavation process. 12 victims, buried over decades in a basement that had been designed specifically for torture and murder. Elena had investigated some terrible crimes during her career, but nothing approached the systematic nature of what the Whitmore family had apparently been doing. "Dr. Walsh, in your professional opinion, is this the work of multiple killers?" "Absolutely. The burial techniques evolved over time, showing different approaches and levels of sophistication. Early burials were crude, almost hasty. Later ones show much more planning and organization. It's consistent with knowledge and techniques being passed down from one generation to the next. Like a family business. That's exactly what it looks like. A family business of murder." Elena spent another hour at the crime scene, documenting everything and trying to understand the full scope of what they were dealing with. The evidence was overwhelming, but it also raised disturbing questions about how such an operation could continue for so long without detection. As she drove back toward town, Elena's radio crackled with a message from Martha, the department's dispatcher. "Sheriff, we've got a situation developing. David Whitmore's wife just called 911. Says her husband left the house this morning with a gun and hasn't been seen since. She's scared he might hurt himself or someone else." Elena felt ice form in her stomach. If David Whitmore was following the family pattern, his disappearance could mean that he was either preparing to add another victim to the collection or planning to destroy evidence before fleeing. "Martha, put out a bolo for David Whitmore's vehicle. Consider him armed and dangerous, and get me a search warrant for his residence. I want to find out what he knows about his family's activities." "Already working on the warrant. But Sheriff, there's something else. We just got a missing person report that might be connected. Jennifer Martinez, no relation to our Deputy Martinez, didn't show up for work yesterday or today. Her supervisor says it's completely out of character." "Where does she work?" "Cedar Ridge Elementary School. She's a teacher. And according to her supervisor, she'd been having problems with a contractor who was working on her house. Guess who the contractor was? Elena's blood went cold. David Whitmore. That's right. And according to Jennifer's neighbor, she and Whitmore had been arguing about shoddy work and cost overruns. The neighbor said Jennifer was planning to file a complaint with the Better Business Bureau. The pattern was repeating itself. A conflict with someone outside the family, followed by a disappearance. If Jennifer Martinez was David Whitmore's latest victim, they might still have time to save her. Martha, coordinate with the state police. I want roadblocks on every highway out of the county, and get me the GPS coordinates for Jennifer Martinez's house. That's where we start looking. Jennifer Martinez lived in a modest ranch-style house on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, the kind of place where a single teacher could afford to live on her salary. But as Elena approached the property, she could see signs that something was wrong. The front door was standing slightly open, and Jennifer's car was still parked in the driveway. Most telling of all, there were fresh tire tracks in the dirt beside the house. Tracks that looked like they came from a heavy truck or van. Elena called for backup before approaching the house, but the urgency of the situation made waiting difficult. If Jennifer Martinez was still alive, every minute could matter. Deputy Martinez arrived within 10 minutes, followed by 2 more patrol units. They approached the house carefully, weapons drawn and ready for anything. "Miss Martinez," Elena called out as they entered through the front door. "This is the Esperanza County Sheriff's Department. Are you all right?" The house was silent, but signs of struggle were immediately apparent. Furniture was overturned in the living room, and there were drops of blood on the hardwood floor. Most disturbing of all, there were muddy footprints leading from the front door to the back of the house. "Sheriff, look at this," Deputy Martinez called from the kitchen. He was standing beside the back door, which showed signs of forced entry. "Someone kicked this in from the outside." Elena examined the damage. The door frame was splintered, and the deadbolt had been torn completely out of the wood. Whoever had done this was strong and determined, not someone who was worried about making noise or leaving evidence. "Carlos, I want you to coordinate the scene processing. Look for anything that might tell us where Whitmore took her. I'm going to check with the neighbors, see if anyone saw or heard anything." The neighbor to the east was an elderly man named Harold Ferguson, who spent most of his time sitting on his front porch watching the world go by. If anyone had seen something unusual, it would be Harold. "Sheriff, I was wondering when you'd come asking," Harold said as Elena approached his porch. "That contractor fellow was here yesterday afternoon making all kinds of racket." "What kind of racket?" "Yelling and carrying on about being cheated and disrespected. Jenny came outside to try to calm him down, but he just got more agitated. Finally, she went back inside and locked the door." "What happened then?" "He left, but he came back after dark. I heard his truck pull up around 9 o'clock, but I didn't see him leave. Figured he was working late or something." Elena felt her heart race. If David Whitmore had returned after dark, it meant the attack on Jennifer Martinez had been planned, not a spontaneous act of violence. "Harold, did you hear anything else? Any sounds that might have been a struggle or someone calling for help?" "Well, now that you mention it, I did hear some thumping and banging around 10:30. Thought maybe Jenny was moving furniture or something. But thinking back on it, it did seem kind of late for that kind of work." "Why didn't you call the police?" Harold looked embarrassed. "To tell you the truth, Sheriff, Jenny and I ain't been getting along too well lately. She complained about my dogs barking, and I complained about her music being too loud. I figured whatever was going on over there was her own business." It was a common problem in rural communities. Neighbors who minded their own business to a fault, sometimes with tragic consequences. If Harold had called the police when he heard the sounds of struggle, Jennifer Martinez might still be safe. Elena returned to Jennifer's house to find that the crime scene team had made some disturbing discoveries. In addition to the signs of struggle in the living room, they had found evidence that Jennifer had been bound and gagged before being removed from the house. "Sheriff, look at this," one of the technicians said, pointing to marks on the hardwood floor. "Rope burns and scuff marks like someone was dragged across the floor. And we found duct tape residue on the kitchen counter." "Any idea where he might have taken her?" "Based on the tire tracks outside, we're looking for a heavy-duty pickup truck or van. The tread pattern matches Goodyear Wrangler tires, size 265/70R17. It's a common size, but it should help narrow down the search." Elena's radio crackled with an update from the state police. "Sheriff, we've got a hit on the bolo. David Whitmore's truck was spotted heading north on Highway 25 about an hour ago. Units are in pursuit." "I'm en route," Elena replied, heading for her patrol car at a run. If they could catch Whitmore before he reached whatever destination he had in mind, they might still be able to save Jennifer Martinez. The chase led them through some of the most remote territory in Esperanza County, along winding mountain roads that offered spectacular views and deadly drop-offs. David Whitmore was driving like a man with nothing to lose, taking curves at speeds that would have been suicidal for most drivers. Elena coordinated the pursuit from her patrol car, staying in radio contact with the state police units that were actually doing the chasing. The goal was to contain Whitmore without forcing him into a crash that might kill both him and his victim. "All units, be advised that the suspect vehicle may contain a hostage," Elena broadcasted. "Do not attempt a pit maneuver or any other aggressive stopping technique without authorization." The pursuit continued for nearly an hour, winding through national forest land where the road became increasingly narrow and dangerous. Finally, Whitmore's truck broke down on a steep grade, steam pouring from under the hood. "He's stopped," came the radio call from the lead pursuit vehicle. "Suspect is out of the truck and running into the forest on foot." Elena arrived at the scene just as the state police were setting up a perimeter. Whitmore's truck was positioned sideways across the road, its engine smoking and obviously disabled. But more importantly, the truck bed was empty. No sign of Jennifer Martinez. "Where is she?" Elena demanded as she approached the abandoned vehicle. Sergeant Riley of the state police was coordinating the search efforts. "No sign of the victim in the truck. Either he dropped her off somewhere along the way or—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Elena understood the implication. David Whitmore might have already killed Jennifer Martinez and disposed of her body before leading them on this chase. "Sergeant, I need a K-9 unit and a helicopter if you can get one. If Martinez is still alive, she could be anywhere in these mountains. Helicopter is en route from Albuquerque. K-9 unit should be here within 30 minutes. Elena studied the terrain around them, trying to think like someone who needed to hide a victim quickly. The forest was dense with pine and aspen trees, but there were also numerous ravines and abandoned mine shafts where a body could be concealed. "Sheriff," one of the state troopers called out, "we found something." He was standing beside Whitmore's truck, holding a cell phone that had been left on the driver's seat. "It's been receiving text messages. Looks like someone's been coordinating with the suspect." Elena examined the phone, scrolling through the message history. What she found made her blood run cold. Phase 1 complete. Package secured. Moving to Location 7 as planned. Cleanup will commence at sunset. The messages were coming from an unknown number, but they clearly indicated that David Whitmore wasn't acting alone. Someone else was involved, someone who knew about the family's activities and was helping to coordinate this latest kidnapping. "Sergeant Riley, we need to trace these phone numbers immediately, and I want that search expanded. We're not just looking for one man anymore." As the search team spread out through the forest, Elena found herself thinking about the pattern of corruption that Deputy Martinez had uncovered. If members of law enforcement had been protecting the Whitmore family for decades, it was possible that the corruption continued into the present day. Who could she trust? Who might be feeding information to David Whitmore or his accomplices? The paranoid thoughts made her feel sick, but she couldn't afford to ignore the possibility. Her radio crackled with a message from the helicopter pilot. "Sheriff, we've got visual on a subject moving through the forest about 2 miles northeast of your position. Single individual, moving quickly through heavy terrain. That's gotta be Whitmore. Vector the ground teams toward that location." But even as she coordinated the pursuit of David Whitmore, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. The text messages suggested a level of organization that went beyond what one desperate man could accomplish on his own. The helicopter pilot's voice came over the radio again. "Sheriff, I'm seeing something else. There's a structure in a clearing about 3 miles north of the suspect's position. Looks like some kind of cabin or outbuilding. No visible activity, but it might be worth checking out." Elena felt her instincts screaming that the cabin was important. "Can you get me GPS coordinates?" "Roger. Coordinates are 35.7128 north, 105.9378 west." Elena plugged the coordinates into her patrol car's GPS system and started driving toward the location. If Jennifer Martinez was being held somewhere in these mountains, an isolated cabin would be the perfect place to hide her. The drive took her along a barely visible dirt track that seemed to have been abandoned for years. Tree branches scraped against her patrol, car's roof, and more than once she had to stop to move fallen logs out of the way. Finally, she reached a small clearing where a weathered log cabin sat beneath a canopy of pine trees. The building looked old but well-maintained, and there was a relatively new pickup truck parked beside it. Elena approached the cabin carefully, her weapon drawn and her radio ready to call for backup. Through a dirty window, she could see movement inside. At least one person, possibly more. "This is Sheriff Vasquez," she whispered into her radio. "I found a structure at the coordinates provided by the helicopter. I can see activity inside, requesting immediate backup." "Backup is en route, Sheriff. ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes was too long if Jennifer Martinez was being tortured or killed inside that cabin. Elena would have to make a decision. Wait for backup and risk losing the victim, or go in alone and risk walking into a trap. The decision was made for her when she heard a woman scream coming from inside the cabin. Elena approached the front door of the cabin, her heart pounding and her weapon ready. Through the thin walls she could hear voices, at least 2 men and a woman who sounded terrified. "Please, I don't know anything about your family. I just wanted my house fixed." That was Jennifer Martinez's voice, confirming that she was alive but in immediate danger. "You threatened to ruin our reputation," came a man's reply. "You were going to cost us business, maybe get us investigated. We can't allow that." Elena recognized the voice as belonging to David Whitmore, but there was something different about his tone. He sounded calm, controlled, almost businesslike. This wasn't the desperate act of a man having a breakdown. It was the calculated behavior of someone who had done this before. "The family has rules," another voice said. "Rules that have kept us safe for 3 generations. People who threaten the family have to be dealt with." Elena moved around to the side of the cabin, looking for another way in. Through a window, she could see Jennifer Martinez tied to a chair in the center of the room. David Whitmore was standing in front of her, but his back was to the window. More importantly, she could see the second man, someone wearing a sheriff's department uniform. Elena's blood went cold as she recognized Deputy Jake Morrison, a 10-year veteran of the department who had always seemed like one of the good guys. If Morrison was involved with the Whitmore family, It meant the corruption went deeper than anyone had imagined. "Sheriff, this is Sergeant Riley," came a whispered voice over her radio. "We're in position outside the cabin. What's your status?" Elena keyed her radio quietly. "I have visual on the victim. She's alive but restrained. 2 suspects inside, David Whitmore and Deputy Morrison from my department." "Morrison, are you sure?" "Positive. I think we've uncovered a conspiracy that goes back decades." "Orders?" Elena studied the situation through the window. Jennifer Martinez was clearly terrified, but didn't appear to be seriously injured. David Whitmore and Morrison were focused on their conversation, apparently deciding what to do with their victim. "I'm going in through the front. When you hear me announce myself, breach through the back door. We need to coordinate this perfectly. If they panic, they might kill the hostage." Elena made her way back to the front door of the cabin, taking deep breaths to steady her nerves. She had been in dangerous situations before, but never one where she couldn't trust her own people. "This is Sheriff Vasquez," she shouted as she kicked in the front door. "Everyone on the ground now." The scene inside the cabin erupted into chaos. David Whitmore spun toward her, his hand moving toward a gun on his belt. Deputy Morrison dove behind a table, drawing his service weapon. "Elena, don't do this," Morrison shouted. "You don't understand what's at stake here." "I understand perfectly, Jake. You've been protecting murderers for God knows how long." Jennifer Martinez was screaming, trying to tip her chair away from the gunfire that she knew was coming. Elena kept her weapon trained on David Whitmore while trying to keep track of Morrison's position. "The Whitmore family has been good to this county," Morrison said, his voice taking on a pleading tone. "They've provided jobs, paid taxes, supported local businesses. A few troublemakers going missing is a small price to pay for that kind of stability." "A few troublemakers? Jake, we found at least 12 bodies buried under their house. People who threatened the family's livelihood. People who would have destroyed everything they'd built." Elena couldn't believe what she was hearing. Morrison wasn't just corrupt. He was a true believer in some twisted philosophy that justified murder in the name of economic stability. "Jake, put down your weapon. This ends now." "I'm sorry, Elena. I really am. But I can't let you destroy everything we've worked to protect." Morrison raised his gun toward Elena, forcing her to make a split-second decision. She fired twice, the shots echoing through the small cabin like thunder. Morrison dropped his weapon and collapsed behind the table, clutching his shoulder and cursing. David Whitmore had frozen when the shooting started, his hand still on his gun but apparently unwilling to draw it. "Hands where I can see them," Elena shouted, keeping her weapon trained on Whitmore. "Get away from that gun." The cabin's back door exploded inward as Sergeant Riley and his team breached the rear entrance. Within seconds, the situation was under control. David Whitmore was on the ground in handcuffs, and Morrison was receiving medical attention for his wounded shoulder. Elena rushed to Jennifer Martinez, cutting the ropes that bound her to the chair. "Are you hurt? Did they do anything to you?" "I'm okay," Jennifer sobbed. "They were going to kill me. They kept talking about family traditions and eliminating threats. You're safe now. It's over." But even as she said it, Elena knew that it wasn't really over. The discovery of corruption within her own department raised questions about how many other cases might have been compromised, how many other crimes might have been covered up. As the state police took David Whitmore and Deputy Morrison into custody, Elena found herself wondering how deep the conspiracy really went. Morrison had been with the department for 10 years. How many investigations had he sabotaged? How many pieces of evidence had he made disappear? "Sheriff," Sergeant Riley approached her as the suspects were being loaded into transport vehicles. We need to talk about the implications of this case. I know. If Morrison was protecting the Whitmore family, there's no telling how much evidence he might have destroyed over the years. It's worse than that. We found something in Morrison's patrol car, a list of names and addresses, people who've had conflicts with various businesses around the county. It looks like the Whitmore operation was expanding beyond just family disputes. Elena felt sick as she considered the implications. If the list represented potential future victims, the conspiracy was far larger than anyone had imagined. How many names? 17. And according to the dates beside each name, several of these people have already gone missing in the past few months. The scope of the crimes was staggering. What had started as a family tradition of eliminating threats had apparently evolved into a business model, with corrupt law enforcement helping to identify targets and cover up the evidence. Sergeant, I need to request federal assistance. This is beyond what local and state agencies can handle. We're looking at a criminal enterprise that may have been operating for decades. Already done. FBI is en route from Albuquerque. They'll want to interview everyone involved and review every case file from the past 20 years. As Elena drove back toward town, her mind raced through the implications of what they had discovered. How many missing persons cases had been dismissed as people simply leaving town? How many families had been denied justice because corrupt officials were protecting killers? The radio crackled with an update from Deputy Martinez, who had been coordinating the investigation from the office. Sheriff, we've got a problem. Word is getting out about Morrison's arrest, and some people are starting to panic. I've had 3 calls in the past hour from people wanting to know if their missing relatives might be connected to this case. That's going to be a long conversation, Carlos. We may need to reopen dozens of cold cases. There's something else. I've been going through Morrison's desk and his computer files. I found email correspondence with someone using the name Family Friend, going back 5 years. Looks like Morrison was getting regular payments for providing information about ongoing investigations. Elena felt her stomach drop. If Morrison had been selling information about police investigations, it meant that other criminals besides the Whitmore family might have benefited from his corruption. How much money are we talking about? Hard to say exactly, but based on what I can find, it looks like Morrison made at least $50,000 over the past 5 years. All of it deposited in a bank account in Las Cruces under his wife's name. $50,000 was a fortune for someone making a deputy's salary. It was more than enough to buy silence and cooperation in covering up serious crimes. Carlos, I want you to secure Morrison's office and his patrol car. Don't let anyone else touch anything until the FBI gets here. And start making a list of every case Morrison was involved with in the past 10 years. We're going to have to review all of them. The drive back to town took Elena past the Whitmore Ranch, where the forensics team was still excavating the basement burial site. The discovery of corruption within her own department had added a new dimension to the investigation, raising questions about how many other victims might be buried on the property. Dr. Walsh was waiting for her when she arrived at the ranch, her expression grim. Sheriff, we've made some additional discoveries that you need to know about. More bodies? Worse. We found a room behind the basement burial area, a hidden chamber that was accessed through a concealed door. Inside, we discovered what appears to be a record-keeping system for the family's activities. Dr. Walsh led Elena down into the basement, past the excavation areas where technicians were still carefully removing human remains. The hidden chamber was small, perhaps 8 feet by 10 feet, with stone walls that felt like a medieval dungeon. "Look at this," Dr. Walsh said, pointing to a series of ledger books arranged on a makeshift shelf. They kept detailed records of every victim. Names, dates, methods of disposal, even photographs. Elena opened one of the ledgers with trembling hands. The entries were written in different handwriting styles, suggesting that multiple generations of the family had contributed to the records. Each entry contained information that made her stomach churn. Thomas Mitchell, age 29. Threatened to expose business practices. Buried North Wall, October 15, 1973. Sarah Williams, age 34, complained to authorities about working conditions. Burned body, scattered ashes in Arroyo, March 3, 1981. Robert Chen, age 42, refused to sell property at requested price. Dissolved in acid, September 22, 1989. The clinical nature of the records was almost as disturbing as the crimes themselves. The Whitmore family had approached murder with the same methodical precision that most people brought to business accounting. Dr. Walsh, how many victims are documented in these ledgers? Preliminary count shows 43 individuals over a 50-year period, but that may not be complete. Some of the older ledgers are damaged, and there are references to records that we haven't found yet. 43 people murdered and carefully disposed of. Their deaths hidden by a combination of family secrecy and official corruption. Elena tried to imagine the families who had spent decades wondering what happened to their missing loved ones, never knowing that the answers were buried beneath a farmhouse in the New Mexico desert. There's something else, Dr. Walsh continued. We found correspondence between the family and several law enforcement officials. Not just Morrison. This goes back to the 1960s. She handed Elena a box filled with letters and documents. The correspondence painted a picture of systematic corruption that spanned multiple administrations, with sheriffs and deputies receiving regular payments in exchange for protection and information. Dr. Walsh, I need copies of everything. Every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence. This is going to be one of the largest criminal investigations in state history. As Elena emerged from the basement, she found FBI agent Sarah Chen waiting for her beside the crime scene vehicles. Agent Chen was a woman in her 40s with the kind of professional demeanor that suggested extensive experience with complex criminal cases. Sheriff Vasquez, I'm Agent Chen from the FBI's Albuquerque field office. I understand you've uncovered a significant criminal conspiracy. That's putting it mildly, Agent Chen. We're looking at multiple homicides spanning 5 decades, with evidence of ongoing corruption within local law enforcement. Elena briefed Agent Chen on the day's discoveries, from the genealogy research that had revealed the pattern of disappearances to the arrest of Deputy Morrison and David Whitmore. Chen listened with the focused attention of someone trained to process complex information quickly. Sheriff, based on what you've told me, this investigation is going to require significant federal resources. We'll need to coordinate with multiple agencies and potentially reopen dozens of cold cases from surrounding jurisdictions. I understand. My department will provide full cooperation. I appreciate that. But I need to be clear about something. Given the evidence of corruption within your department, we'll need to conduct this investigation independently. That means federal agents will be taking the lead on all major aspects of the case. Elena had expected this response, but it still stung. The corruption of Deputy Morrison had tainted the entire department in the eyes of federal investigators, making it impossible for local law enforcement to maintain credibility in such a high-profile case. What do you need from us? Complete access to all case files, personnel records, and evidence. We'll also need to interview every member of your department to determine the extent of the corruption. Over the next several hours, Elena watched as federal agents took control of what had been her investigation. FBI technicians photographed and cataloged every piece of evidence, while other agents began the process of interviewing department personnel to determine who else might have been compromised. The media attention was intense and immediate. Within hours of the arrests, News crews from Albuquerque and Phoenix had descended on Cedar Ridge, turning the normally quiet town into a circus of satellite trucks and reporters. The story of a multi-generational murder conspiracy was exactly the kind of sensational crime that captured national attention. Elena found herself fielding phone calls from reporters, federal officials, and politicians who all wanted to know how such a conspiracy could have operated for so long without detection. The questions were fair, but painful, forcing her to confront the possibility that she had missed warning signs during her own tenure as sheriff. "Sheriff," Agent Chen approached her as the sun was setting over the crime scene. "We need to discuss the scope of this investigation. Based on the evidence we've found so far, we believe the Whitmore conspiracy may extend beyond Esperanza County." "What do you mean?" "The financial records we recovered from the ranch show payments to law enforcement officials in at least 3 other counties. We think this family was operating a regional network of corruption and murder." Elena felt sick. Bad enough that her own department had been compromised, but the idea that the conspiracy had spread across multiple jurisdictions suggested a level of organization that bordered on the criminal enterprise. "How many other departments are we talking about?" "Preliminary analysis suggests at least 4 counties in New Mexico and 2 in Colorado. We're coordinating with federal agents in those jurisdictions to determine the extent of the corruption. And the victims could be in the hundreds, Sheriff. This family wasn't just killing people who crossed them directly. They were also eliminating people who posed threats to their business associates and political allies." The scope of the crimes was almost incomprehensible. Elena had been a law enforcement officer for nearly 2 decades, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for a criminal conspiracy of this magnitude. "Agent Chen, what happens to my department now?" "That depends on what our investigation reveals. If the corruption was limited to Morrison and perhaps 1 or 2 others, you might be able to rebuild trust and continue operating. But if we find evidence of broader involvement..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. If the corruption was widespread, the entire Esperanza County Sheriff's Department could be disbanded and replaced with state or federal oversight. Elena's radio crackled with a message from Deputy Martinez. "Sheriff, we've got another situation developing. David Whitmore's wife is here at the station with her children. She says she has information about other family members who might be involved in this conspiracy. I'll be right there." The drive back to town gave Elena time to think about the personal dimension of the tragedy that was unfolding. David Whitmore's wife and children were innocent victims of a family legacy they had probably never fully understood. How do you explain to children that their father and grandfather and great-grandfather were all serial killers? Linda Whitmore was waiting in the sheriff's office conference room when Elena arrived, her 2 young children sitting quietly beside her with the stunned expressions of people whose world had just collapsed. Linda herself looked like she had aged 10 years in the past 24 hours. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Sheriff Vasquez. I understand you have information that might help our investigation." Linda nodded, her hands shaking as she tried to maintain her composure in front of her children. "Sheriff, I knew something was wrong with David's family, but I never thought they were actually killing people." "What kind of things did you notice?" "Strange conversations, mostly. David's father would talk about family obligations and maintaining traditions. He made it sound like some kind of business philosophy, but there was always something creepy about the way he said it." Elena pulled out a notepad, preparing to document everything Linda could remember. "Did you ever see anything suspicious at the ranch?" "We didn't visit the ranch very often. Michael, that was David's father, always said it was too dangerous for children, too many old buildings and abandoned equipment. But the few times we did go there, I noticed that certain parts of the property were off limits." "Off limits how?" The basement of the main house, for one thing. Michael always kept it locked, said it was just storage, but that the stairs were unsafe. And there was an old shed behind the house that David was never allowed to enter, even as an adult. Elena made a note to have the FBI search the shed Linda had mentioned. If the family had been disposing of bodies for 50 years, there might be additional burial sites on the property. Mrs. Whitmore, did David ever talk about other family members who might have been involved in these activities? Linda glanced at her children, clearly struggling with how much to say in front of them. Elena took the hint and arranged for a deputy to take the children to the break room for some snacks and cartoons. Once the children were out of earshot, Linda's composure cracked. "Sheriff, I think David's uncle might be involved. Robert Whitmore lives up in Colorado near Durango. David used to visit him several times a year, and he always came back acting strange." "Strange how?" "Paranoid, secretive. He'd check and double-check the locks on our house like he was afraid someone was coming after us. And he started talking about family responsibilities and how some secrets had to be kept at any cost." Elena felt her pulse quicken. If Robert Whitmore was still alive and living in Colorado, he might be continuing the family tradition of murder. "Mrs. Whitmore, when was the last time David visited his uncle?" "About 3 months ago. He was gone for a week, said it was a family emergency. But when he came back, he was different. More aggressive, more paranoid. He started talking about people who were threats to the family and how they needed to be dealt with." 3 months ago. Elena made a mental note to have Agent Chen coordinate with Colorado authorities to investigate any recent disappearances in the Durango area. "Is there anything else you can tell me about David's behavior or his family's activities?" Linda was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the decision. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Sheriff, I think there might be other children." "Other children?" David mentioned having cousins, but he was always vague about who they were or where they lived. I got the impression that the family was larger than he let on, but that they maintained distance from each other for security reasons. Elena felt a chill as she realized the implications. If the Whitmore family had deliberately scattered across multiple states to avoid detection, there could be active killers operating throughout the region. "Mrs. Whitmore, did David keep any family records, photo albums, genealogy charts, address books?" "There's a lockbox in our closet. David always said it contained important family documents, but he never let me see what was inside." "We'll need to search your house, if that's all right." "With your permission, of course." Linda nodded. "Sheriff, I want to help in any way I can. I can't bring back the people they killed, but maybe I can help you prevent more murders." The search of David Whitmore's house revealed additional evidence of the family's criminal activities. The lockbox Linda had mentioned contained genealogy charts that showed a sprawling family tree with members scattered across 8 states. More disturbing were the detailed notes about each family member, including their specialties and areas of operation. "Look at this," Agent Chen said, showing Elena a page from David's notes. "Robert Whitmore, Colorado, specializes in outdoor accidents. Michael Whitmore Jr., Texas, vehicle incidents. Sarah Whitmore Thompson, Arizona, medical emergencies." They were coordinating their murder methods to avoid patterns that might attract attention. Exactly. Each family member specialized in a different type of killing, making it almost impossible for law enforcement to connect the crimes. Elena studied the genealogy chart, trying to comprehend the scope of what they were dealing with. If the family had been operating for 50 years with members in 8 states, the total number of victims could be in the hundreds. "Agent Chen, how do we even begin to investigate something this large?" "Very carefully and very systematically. We'll coordinate with federal agents in every state where family members are located. Simultaneously raid all known addresses, seize all records, and conduct interviews with anyone who might have information. When? Tomorrow morning. We can't afford to wait. If word gets out about what we've discovered, family members might destroy evidence or flee the country. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed thinking about the victims whose bodies were buried beneath the Whitmore Ranch, about the families who had spent decades wondering what happened to their missing loved ones. She thought about Deputy Morrison and the corruption that had allowed these crimes to continue for so long. But mostly, she thought about the systematic nature of the evil they had uncovered. This wasn't the work of a single disturbed individual, or even a small group of criminals. This was a multi-generational criminal enterprise that had corrupted law enforcement, eliminated threats, and accumulated wealth and power through decades of carefully planned murder. At 6 o'clock the next morning, Elena's phone rang. It was Agent Chen, calling with an update on the coordinated raids that were taking place across the western United States. "Sheriff, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is that we've arrested 4 more family members in Colorado, Texas, and Arizona. The bad news is that at least 3 others appear to have fled, probably warned by someone who knew about our investigation. How could they have been warned? We're not sure yet. Could be another corrupt law enforcement official, or it might be that the family had contingency plans for this kind of situation." Elena felt her stomach sink. If family members had escaped, they could continue killing while on the run, or they might retaliate against the people who had exposed their activities. "Agent Chen, what about the evidence we've recovered? Can we connect the family to specific crimes? The ledgers from the ranch are incredibly detailed. We're already matching entries to missing persons cases from multiple states. It's going to take months to process everything, but we should be able to close dozens of cold cases." Over the following weeks, the full scope of the Whitmore conspiracy became clear. FBI investigations revealed that the family had been responsible for at least 87 murders across 8 states over a period of 53 years. The victims included business rivals, potential witnesses, law enforcement officers who couldn't be corrupted, and ordinary citizens who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The corruption network was equally extensive. 23 law enforcement officers from 6 states were eventually arrested for taking bribes from the family. Several politicians and judges were also implicated in the conspiracy, having received campaign contributions or other benefits in exchange for protection. The media coverage was intense and sustained. The Whitmore case became one of the most extensively covered criminal investigations in recent memory, spawning documentaries, books, and endless speculation about how such a conspiracy could have operated for so long. For Elena, the aftermath was both professionally and personally challenging. While the FBI investigation cleared her and most of her department of any wrongdoing, the revelation that Deputy Morrison had been corrupt cast a shadow over everything they had done during his tenure. "Sheriff," Agent Chen called her one afternoon about 6 weeks after the initial arrests. "I wanted to give you an update on the investigation. We've identified the last 3 missing family members." Where were they? Mexico. They'd apparently been planning an escape route for years, with false identities and financial resources already in place. Mexican authorities arrested them yesterday. That's good news. There's more. The interrogations have revealed information about additional burial sites. We think there might be more bodies at properties in Colorado and Texas. Elena felt tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. Every revelation brought new horrors, new evidence of the systematic evil that the Whitmore family had perpetrated for decades. "Agent Chen, when does this end?" I wish I could give you a definitive answer, Sheriff. We're still processing evidence, still identifying victims, still untangling the financial aspects of the conspiracy. It could be years before we have a complete picture. And the trials? The first ones will probably begin next year. Given the complexity of the case and the number of defendants, the legal proceedings could continue for the better part of a decade. A decade of trials, testimony, and reliving the horrors that had been hidden beneath the New Mexico desert. Elena wondered if the families of the victims would find closure in the legal process, or if the lengthy proceedings would simply prolong their suffering. Sheriff, Agent Chen continued, I want you to know that your department's work on this case was exemplary. If Deputy Martinez hadn't done that genealogy research, if you hadn't been willing to pursue the investigation despite the political implications, the Whitmore family might have continued killing for years. It was a generous assessment, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they should have uncovered the conspiracy sooner. How many lives could have been saved if someone had connected the dots earlier? 3 months after the initial arrests, Helena stood in the basement of the former Whitmore ranch, watching as forensic technicians carefully excavated the last of the burial sites. The building would eventually be demolished, but not before every piece of evidence had been recovered and every victim had been identified. Dr. Walsh approached her with a final report on the excavation. Sheriff, we've completed the recovery process. Final count is 51 individuals buried on this property alone. 51 people whose lives had been cut short by a family that saw murder as a business tool. 51 families who would finally have answers about what happened to their missing loved ones. Dr. Walsh, were you able to identify all of them? Most of them. Dental records, DNA analysis, and the family's meticulous record-keeping allowed us to identify 47 of the victims. The other 4 will probably remain unknown. Elena thought about those 4 unknown victims. People who had been so thoroughly erased that even their identities couldn't be recovered. In some ways, they represented the ultimate tragedy of the Whitmore conspiracy. Not just murder, but the complete obliteration of human existence. What happens to the property now? The state will probably sell it eventually, once all the legal proceedings are complete. I doubt anyone will want to live here, given the history. As Elena drove away from the ranch for the last time, she reflected on the lessons the case had taught her about the nature of evil and the importance of vigilance in law enforcement. The Whitmore family had succeeded for so long because they understood how to exploit the weaknesses in the system. Corruption, jurisdictional boundaries, and the tendency of people to mind their own business. But they had also succeeded because good people had failed to ask the right questions, failed to see the patterns that should have been obvious in retrospect. The price of that failure had been measured in dozens of lives and decades of unpunished crime. The Whitmore case would reshape law enforcement in rural New Mexico for years to come. New protocols were established for investigating missing persons cases. New oversight mechanisms were put in place to prevent corruption, and new training programs were developed to help officers recognize the signs of organized criminal activity. Elena remained a sheriff of Esperanza County, but the job was never the same. Every missing person report, every unsolved crime, every hint of corruption was viewed through the lens of the Whitmore case. The investigation had shown that evil could hide in plain sight for decades, and that assumption of innocence could sometimes be a luxury that law enforcement couldn't afford. 5 years later, as Elena prepared to retire from law enforcement, she received a call from Agent Chen with a final update on the case. All of the surviving Whitmore family members had been convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The last of the corrupt law enforcement officers had been prosecuted, and new safeguards had been put in place to prevent similar conspiracies. Sheriff, I wanted to thank you again for your work on this case, Agent Chen said. The Whitmore investigation became a model for how to uncover and prosecute multi-generational criminal conspiracies. I just wish we could have stopped them sooner. You can't blame yourself for not seeing what was deliberately hidden. The important thing is that you saw it when it mattered, and you had the courage to pursue it despite the political and personal risks. As Elena cleaned out her office on her last day as sheriff, she came across a letter that had arrived the previous week. It was from the daughter of one of the Whitmore victims, a woman whose father had disappeared 40 years earlier. Sheriff Vasquez, the letter read, I wanted to thank you for giving my family closure after 4 decades of not knowing what happened to my father. The pain of losing him will never go away, but at least now we know the truth. More importantly, your investigation prevented other families from experiencing the same loss. My father would have been proud to know that his death contributed to stopping these monsters. Elena folded the letter carefully and placed it in her personal files. It would serve as a reminder of why she had chosen law enforcement as a career, and why the work was important despite its challenges and frustrations. The Whitmore case had taught her that evil could be patient, systematic, and incredibly destructive when left unchecked. But it had also taught her that good people, working together with courage and determination, could eventually bring even the most carefully hidden criminals to justice. As she walked out of the sheriff's office for the last time, Elena reflected on the delicate balance between trust and suspicion that defined law enforcement work. The case had shown that too much trust could allow corruption to flourish, but too much suspicion could destroy the community relationships that made effective policing possible. Finding that balance would be the challenge for her successor and for law enforcement, officers throughout the region who were still dealing with the aftermath of the Whitmore conspiracy. The scars left by 50 years of murder and corruption would take generations to fully heal. But the healing had begun, and that was something. In the end, that might be all anyone could ask for. That the truth would eventually emerge, that justice would eventually be served, and that the cycle of violence would finally be broken. The Whitmore family's reign of terror was over, but the lessons learned from their crimes would continue to shape law enforcement for years to come. In rural communities across America, sheriff's deputies would be better trained to recognize the signs of organized criminal activity, better equipped to investigate complex conspiracies, and better prepared to resist the corruption that had allowed such horrors to continue for so long. It was a small comfort in the face of such immense tragedy, but it was real nonetheless. The blood and ashes of the Whitmore victims had not been spilled in vain if their deaths prevented future atrocities and helped build a more just and vigilant system of law enforcement. Elena drove home through the New Mexico desert, past red rock formations that had witnessed too much history and hidden too many secrets. The landscape was beautiful and timeless, but she would always see it differently now, as a place where evil had flourished in the shadows, and where the price of innocence had been measured in human lives. The case was closed, but its echoes would continue to reverberate through her dreams and memories for the rest of her life. Some investigations changed you, and the Whitmore case had changed her in ways she was still trying to understand. But she had no regrets about pursuing the truth, no matter how painful it had been to uncover. In a world where corruption and violence could hide behind smiling faces and family traditions, someone had to be willing to ask the hard questions and follow the evidence wherever it led. That was the burden and the privilege of wearing a badge in a complex and dangerous world. Elena had carried that burden with honor, and she hoped her successor would do the same.